There we go. You're still popping up with the wrong name, Councillor.
Yeah, sorry.
It happens. I know who you are, luckily, so I think we'll get through the meeting okay. With that, I think we have all of the members of council. Yep, we do joined us. So with that, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. The time is 7:04. We are meeting and gathering today in the traditional territory of the Coast and Strait Salish people. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and their connections to these lands continue to this day. Up first, we just have approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder for the agenda? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. We have adoption of the minutes of April 26th. I got a mover, moved and seconded. Is there any corrections or changes to those minutes? Not seeing any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We have a number of rise and reports. And just need a motion essentially to rise and report on items 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. That's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Not seeing any. And just for those watching, this council will be making an effort to go back a couple of years and just make sure that all matters that should have been risen and reported on are risen and reported on, and to do it in a timely fashion going forward. So this is a sort of the last of the catch-ups that we have to do, but you will see this as a standard part of all of our agenda items going forward. Sorry, Councillor Zelka, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. Regarding 4.1 and the change, Fireman's Park being changed to Firefighters Park. I just wanted to also note that the tower, the firefighters tower that was standing over Oak Bay has just gone down today. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we don't have that vantage point to see to take pictures up high, and it's sad to see the tower go, but I'm sure the firefighters will come up with some other way of test or training as they find other places for stairs to go up and down. And hopefully at some point the fire chief will let us know what changes are afoot at the fire department. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. No see any discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Item 5.1, Mayor's remarks. I just want to remind all erstwhile Arts laureates to please be sure to send in your applications by this Friday. We are hoping to have a couple of at least people apply, and again from any area of the arts that can take a leadership role in helping to move forward what has been a very special and successful program under the former Arts Laureate Barbara Adams, to continue that work and continue to assist this community with realizing its vision for support of the arts. So that's due this Friday. I also just want to make a comment that I've had a number of conversations with the new president at the University of Victoria, Kevin Hall, and their staff, just addressing a number of issues of regional significance and interest. And I know just in conversation with the UVic liaison, Councillor Braithwaite, I do expect a lot of good work to come out of that. I think they have a lot of interest in being more actively engaged in our communities, not just Oak Bay, but in all the core municipalities. And I just want to express my appreciation again for I had a couple of conversations at the end of last week with members of the public about the process for the marina and the expectations going forward. And I just really appreciate the people's interest in that, their feedback, just the huge response we got in terms of the public input, and just want to just let people know that input is informing the process with the marinas and through the entire process. So, but I just, yeah, it's always nice to hear from people and to get their inputs on things. And I just want to express my appreciation for that. That concludes my remarks for this evening. Moving on to item number 6, we under reports and memorandums. This is subject to public input, so if anybody wishes to call in, you can, if you're live, you can use the selection button under reactions. You can choose raise hand, and we will go to you during the public portion of this. But first, we're going to have a presentation from KPMG, then from our Director of Finance. And with that, I will hand it over to Ms. Lee, I believe we have, to speak to our audited financial report.
Hi, it's me. Did you want my video or no?
To your comfort level, sometimes it's nice to see your face, but if you don't want to, there's
Yeah,
no requirement to.
it's not letting me do it. There we go. Maybe
There we
somebody
are.
needed to do it for me.
Now we can see you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liette Bates-Seamer. I'm the audit partner on our engagement this year. Our manager on the file was Julie Robinson. Again, both of us have been involved with the audit for a few years now. I'll just speak to the highlights of our findings that has been communicated in writing to you in our audit findings report. In terms of the status of our audit, as of today, we are complete. We have performed all of our auditing procedures and are in a position to sign our opinion. The last few steps in the audit are just having the discussions with council tonight, and then for management to sign our rep letter dated today so that all of their representations hold up until today. We anticipate issuing a clean audit opinion as is included in the draft financial statements that you have prepared your financial statements, and they present fairly in all material respects in accordance with public sector accounting standards. I'll note that the materiality that we used in our audit to be able to issue that opinion, that they are not materially misstated, is 900,000. That's consistent with what we've used in prior years. It's about 2.2% of total expenses. So in a not-for-profit environment, we are using a gross benchmark of could be total revenue, could be total expenses. We've historically used total expenses here for the district. We can be anywhere from 0.5 to 3%. So we're at 2.2. The 900 is supposed to represent the level of error that would change a user's decisions when looking at your financial statements. With a materiality level of 900,000, we do report any differences we find throughout our procedures that are greater than 45,000. So you get reporting at a much lower level. I'll point out a couple of the sort of differences in the audit this year being the impact of COVID. So you'll see some of the figures in the financial statements were impacted specifically by COVID, and there are some additional disclosures related to COVID. One being just around measurement uncertainty that the whole situation brings to the future. And there is some enhanced wording in your policies around measurement uncertainty in the notes to the financial statements. You did receive a significant grant from the province of BC called the Safe Restart Grant, which has been disclosed separately in note 7 in the details of your surplus. So that's sitting in a reserve at year end. No amounts had been applied in 2020 of that amount. Just for your information, we did perform our audit remotely. So, you know, in regular years, we come out to the municipal hall there and we sit in a boardroom. When we speak to management, we have in-person conversations. We look at physical evidence, hard copies of papers. So for the last couple of years, we have been doing our audit remotely. So we have a way to securely transfer all of the audit working papers and support to us electronically. We found that process to be quite efficient with management there. You know, there's no compromising of the audit evidence that we receive by doing the audit remotely. I'll just point out the one area where the statements were also kind of significantly impacted is just in the declines around recreation revenues and related expenses in recreation. So we performed analytical procedures over those variances, taking into account when facilities were closed and then reopened in a reduced capacity, and found no issues with the amounts recorded by the district. The one risk we do identify in this audit is that required by professional standards, which is fraud risk due to management override. Nothing specific to Oak Bay. We have addressed this risk through our procedures around journal entry testing and looking at any unusual transactions or significant estimates. We report on our procedures around tangible capital assets and the sort of audit work we do around that. Nothing to report in that area for this year. I can report that we did not identify any differences to bring to your attention. So like I said, we would report anything greater than 45,000 if it was a corrected difference or remained uncorrected, and there were none of corrected differences or anything left uncorrected. So kudos to management for excellent preparation of the financial statements. I can also report that we did not identify any significant deficiencies in internal controls throughout our audit. We do make other observations or recommendations related to internal controls. These are summarized in our management letter, which is included in the appendix of our report. There were several other control deficiencies identified last year, which we have sort of followed up on. And those matters are pretty much all resolved, being the review of financial information by management and council that is now happening regularly. Recognition of deferred capital or developer contributed assets is also, there's a process for that in place now. I think management has even further enhancements to that process, but the issue has been taken care of. A new travel and expense reimbursement policy was issued as we had recommended, as well as a new IT security policy within the year. So all of the matters from the past have been resolved. We had one current year recommendation that was a minor recommendation around review of payroll prior to processing payment, which management had already sort of taken care of and remedied by the time that we were kind of completing our audit. Lastly, I'll report that we are independent as your auditors, as required for me to communicate that to you at this stage. And then just say thanks to management for all of their help with doing the audit in this new way. It was, went very efficiently from our perspective, and we got a well prepared package to audit. So I think Chris will follow me. So I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Ms. Bates-Emer, and yeah, welcome, Mr. Payne. And for those watching, Mr. Payne is our Director of Financial Services.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mrs. Bates-Emer, for the presentation. I just want to remind Council that my role in this presentation is a bit different than KPMG. KPMG's role was to audit the financial statements and tell the public whether or not, in their opinion, it presented fairly. My role is to prepare the financial statements and provide Council with a little bit of analysis on what those financial statements do and what they mean. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to provide a bit of analysis here. Council is invited, and the public is invited to ask any detailed questions that they may have after the presentation. Some of the analysis that we perform in leading up to the consolidated financial statements will include, did management spend within council approved limits? So the financial plan bylaw sets those limits. They're the top end of which staff can spend in order to achieve council's priorities for the public, and staff did not exceed those limits. And that's conveyed in the budget to actual variances in the financial statements. And what were the reasons for the variances? So staff have outlined some of the broad reasons for the variances in the financial statements, which if council has reviewed, can ask for further details if needed. And what is the financial condition of the district? So that's some of the things we'll talk about in the presentation today. I always need to remind council and the public about the differences in the formatting for public sector accounting standard financial statements and the budget. The budget serves a different purpose. It's subject to the community charter. Public sector accounting standards are subject to Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. So they really do convey two different pieces of information, but they are quite related. So in the budgeting sense, we are not allowed to budget for a surplus and what we call a budget surplus. that is materially different than what is referred to in the financial statements as an accounting surplus. An accounting surplus is simply revenues less expenses. A budget surplus is revenues less expenses, as well as less capital expenditures, debt principal payments, and transfers to reserves. So those three main items are also taken into consideration as to whether or not we considered whether we have a budget surplus. So the district did not budget for a budget surplus. It's $0. That's what we had budgeted. And what you will see reported in the financial statements is $11 million accounting surplus, which is if you try to translate that to budgeting, it can be a little bit misleading. Much of that was transferred to reserves. For instance, $3.59 million in the COVID restart grant funds were transferred to reserves. So that doesn't count towards a budgetary surplus. Much of that was spent on capital expenditures. So this year we spent almost $5.9 million in capital expenditures. So overall, what staff are reporting to be a budgetary surplus is actually $1.1 million. And that can be seen in the chart in the executive summary of the report. So if you want to talk about budget, that's a good place to start. You want to talk about financial accounting standards, public sector accounting, financial statements are a good place to look. So as mentioned, I won't go into the variances in detail unless council or the public has specific questions. We underspent in all financial statement categories. The Parks, Rec, and Culture budget deficit was approximately $1 million when you take into consideration the reduced revenues compared to the reduced expenses when you compare that to the budget. So that's relatively good news. We had forecasted as high as $2.5 million in a budget deficit from the Parks, Rec, and Culture Department. So that came in at $1 million. So that's better than what we had expected in the Q2 and Q3 budget reports. So that's good. And that budget deficit was largely offset by underspending in other departments, water and sewer, utilities, the police department, et cetera. Many of the departments were asked, if possible, to reduce spending because we anticipated that there was going to be a budget deficit from Parks, Rec, and Culture. And they delivered that. And what resulted again was a $1.1 million budget surplus as a result. Recall Council adopted a new investment policy. I believe it was adopted in early 2020. That investment policy specifically required staff to periodically report on investment balances and details. That objective is largely accomplished via Note 2 in the financial statements, if you want to have a look there. That Note 2 details the balances of our various types of investments, and the investment policy governs how much investments we can have and what types of security. So Note 2 discloses that, and the public and council can be assured that we are in compliance with our investment policy. So some of the interesting things that you'll see there was that we didn't have any term deposits last year. This year we ended the year with $11 million in term deposits. We reduced our exposure to the Municipal Finance Authority Money Market Fund by about $17 million. And that money was transferred or moved around for operations, but also resulted in a $9 million increase in our fossil fuel free bond fund through the Municipal Finance Authority, and an increase of about $5.6 million into our regular bond fund. We also ended the year with a lot of money in our general bank reserve. Most of that was actually for the remittance of our school tax, which was deferred by the province. So we didn't actually remit the balance of our 2020 school tax payment until early 2021. So we had a large cash balance at the end of the year as we spoke as well. And the last thing I'll cover in my presentation prior to any questions was, again, just on the internal controls. Miss Bates-Emer talked about them quite eloquently. All of the internal control recommendations that have been made by KPMG in prior years' audits have been largely resolved. As mentioned, one of the outstanding recommendations was around the approval of the payroll register, which management have implemented prior to the end of the audit. And so we believe that all of the internal control recommendations have been implemented successfully. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm available. Both myself and Ms. Bates-Emer are available for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. I'm sure there will be some questions here from council. And again, if anybody from the public wishes to ask any questions, they can also do so. And they can hit *9 to raise their hand. But I'm going to go through council first to ensure that we have a chance to address the key questions from council before going to the public. I saw a hand pop up. There we go. Councillor Braithwaite, you may start us off.
Thank you very much, Elman. Thank you to Mr. Payne and Ms. Bates-Emer for the presentation. I do have a question that you may have just answered, actually, Mr. Payne, and it was on page 16 of the report. It's the statement of cash flow. And under the changes in non-cash operating assets and liabilities, there's a line that says accounts payable and accrued liabilities. And this year it was at 9.7 million, and last year it was minus 271,000. And I'm thinking from what you just said that might have been from the school district or our payment to the school district.
Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, Councillor Braithwaite, someone may have given me the heads up that you were going to ask that question, and you're absolutely correct. The school tax payment is actually made to the province. The province uses those funds in general revenue, but also for the school districts. But yeah, last year, due to COVID, the province specifically allowed for the remittance of the school tax to be made in the subsequent year. Normally, the 75% of the payment is due before the end of July. So we retain those funds. We could have paid them early, but we retained those funds and earned a little bit of interest income on them, and we remitted them in early 2021.
Thank you. And if I may, Mayor, one other question. So 3 lines below that, the deferred revenue this year was minus 448,000, and last year was minus 54,000.
Mr. Payne.
Yes, Your Worship. We maintain deposits as well as deferred revenue for various reasons. Some of the deferred revenue was in receipt of a grant that was conditional. And so as soon as we proceed with the work that's required for that grant, we recognize it as revenue. And so it gets reduced.
Okay.
And there's other situations where we will take in deposits from developers that are refunded upon completion of their work that they've promised to do. And so there was a number of prominent developments that received refunds through the year.
Okay. Thank you. And then if I may, Mayor, my last comment would just be just to say thank you, Ms. Bates-Emer, for bringing up the control deficiencies, because I did read with interest in Appendix A and all of the recommendations that have been put forward last year that have been met this year. So kudos to staff for being able to meet those. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Are there other questions from council to either Ms. Bates-Emer or to staff? I see Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. I also congratulate staff on clean audit. That's always very nice for the district, and so certainly congratulations to staff for that, and thank you to Ms. Emer Bates for her Bates-Emer, I guess it is, for her presentation to us. Thank you. Just a quick question. I don't have very many on this because everything is so nicely presented. And of course, we get most of the details in the financial plan. But on the deferred revenue and the gas tax agreement funding, just a quick question about the interest earned, because some of the money has already been committed by council towards the specific sewer infrastructure project. So the interest earned on that money does it also accrue to the sewer project, or is that capped now for the sewer project and all the interest just goes in with any reserves from gas tax that we use for other municipal, whatever we are undertaking, any other projects?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne?
Yes, your worship, the interest in respect of the deferred revenue, which would be the upland sewer separation project, that is earned and added to that balance. And you can review and see that for the public in note 3. And you are correct, Councillor Patterson, that other gas tax funds that we receive are not there. They're elsewhere. They're in our reserves, and the interest earned on those are accrued to those funds as well.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Any other questions of Ms. Bates-Emer or of staff? Just one question from a process perspective, Mr. Payne. Obviously, there is our annual report that also comes out a bit later in the year that contains this information, but with a bit more narrative, I guess I would say, in terms of the how we met against targets, et cetera, and a number of metrics that we try and track equally year over year. When is that due out?
Your worship, there's 2 more pieces of financial reporting that council will see, both of them June 30th. So June 30th, the statement of financial information. That's probably not what you're referring to in terms of narrative, but it is additional financial disclosures. And again, that's June 30th. Same deadline for our annual report. We append our financial statements to the annual report, and the annual report, usually includes many other narratives and performance measures and statistics.
Thank you very much for that, for clarification. Any other questions from council? I'm going to go to the public here. If any members of the public wish to speak, if you're online, you can use the raise hand function within Zoom, or you can hit *9 to raise your hand within the meeting. I don't see hands popping up, but Ms. Williams, has there been anybody who's indicated they wish to speak from the public?
No, your worship, nobody at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will say, generally speaking, when people wish to address us, they pre-register as requested to do so. So I'm not seeing any there. I am going to come back to this meeting. Councillor Patterson, you have your hand up.
Yes, Mayor, if there are no other questions, I would make the motion that we receive the staff report titled 2020 Financial Statements, authored by Christopher Payne, dated May 10th, 2021, and that the 2020 financial statements be approved.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any other discussion on that? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a quick chance to ask one more question as part of the motion. With respect to loans, this may not be the financial statements may not be the most clear way of describing our loans that are outstanding. I wanted to ask in particular about the loan for the Parks Rec and Culture building on B Street. I understand that'll be paid off shortly. I was wondering if Director Payne could possibly speak to that. I see up, on page 16, 17, there's some discussion there about the loans, but I just wanted to know how close are we to paying off the Parks Rec and Culture building on B?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne?
Yes, Your Worship. The loan should be paid off in 2023.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion? Don't see any. I'll just express, as others have, my appreciation both for the auditors working through strange times and to staff. I understand this has been a much smoother process this year than in past years, as we've gotten our internal systems cleaner and our reporting cleaner and our systems constantly improved. So just thank the staff for that. And thank the auditors for all their work as well. I know it's not easy in these times to make it all work. So thank you for putting in tools to allow that to happen fairly seamlessly. Not seeing any other hands up. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Bates-Emer, and have yourself a good evening.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Up next, we have pickleball courts at Carnarvon Park. This is just a bit of a strangeness because we have it later in the agenda as well. So just for a little clarification, as council knows, but the public may not be aware, we have committee of the whole will often discuss things at length, and they make recommendations through motions to council. If council adopts those, then they show up, then they become a directive to staff to move forward. If you're wondering why, there is an item 6.4 that also touches on the same pickleball courts. It's just because staff went away and saw an opportunity to come back quickly with a report that was time sensitive, and so we have both. We have these recommendations from committee of the whole that council would normally just move forward, and which is procedurally, I think, ideally the way we'll go. And then we'll deal with the one item that will have a bit quicker time frame, which is item 6.4 on the agenda. So I just want to touch with Ms. Williams. Is there anything there in terms of procedure? Can council move these recommendations as one, or would you prefer that they get moved together, or would you prefer that there be some discussion before we move these pieces, Ms. Williams?
Certainly, they can be moved as one motion. Council separated them as that's how they were voted on at the committee of the whole meeting, but you have every ability to just move those as one recommendation.
Okay, I'll take direction from council on how they see they want that to go forward. So go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to make a motion with all of them, bound together, but I would like to hear what others feel.
Well, you can make the motion. If someone wishes to separate them, I will do so.
I'll move the recommendations as presented by staff in the staff report together. So
okay. Is there a seconder? I see a seconder. So anything else, Councillor Green, you wish to speak to the motion?
Well, I just really want to thank staff for handling this so quickly and the quick turnaround and covering off issues and questions that we raised in the last meeting. I'm very appreciative, and I thank Mr. Meikle and Mr. Herman for their diligence on this particular file, which hasn't always been an easy one. So thank you.
Thank you. Just to be clear, we're moving on 6.2 right now, which is basically giving direction to go forward with and bring back a number of options. One of those options is the pickleball court, which will come forward as a specific motion at 6.4.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
No, just so we're all very clear about what the motion is here.
Well, I won't have to speak later then, will I?
It's all good. So I'll take the motion as 6.2 is laid out here, though, which is the committee of the whole recommendations. Okay, and that's the seconder is amenable to that. That's the understanding. Okay, great, thank you. Don't see anything else from the mover or seconder, so go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Just to make sure I am clear here, I think I understand what we're doing, but I did want to, and we're going to deal with the court thing in the later item. But if I wanted to bring back a motion at this meeting to reconsider the staff recommendation from the previous report, would I do that here or under the next item, Mr. Mayor?
This item is providing direction to staff for what to do next. So what was decided at the committee of the whole, recommended to this body, was these 4 recommendations: to report back cost and timelines to temporarily relocate, that the analysis include options for noise reduction measures, that staff provide options for pickleball free evenings and like some nights of the week, and that staff provide information on the costing of alternate locations at the Henderson Rec Center. The only one of those that's going to be considered later is item number 1 of those, where we'll get into that in more detail with the staff report. So if there's anything you wish to add to this, I think proceed, unless if it conflicts with any of these, then I would suggest you make a motion to amend it in some way. If it doesn't conflict with any of those recommendations, if you're supportive of those 4, I'll leave the option for you to make an additional motion at the end to add another direction.
Okay, so I think the one that it's going to conflict when is the third one where we ask staff to come back with options for pickle-free evenings.
Then procedurally, I will just take each of these motions separately and call a vote on each one separately.
Okay,
But I'm happy to take discussion on any one of those items at this point.
oh, okay, so can I speak
Well,
to it?
Yeah,
Or
you can,
no?
but I think if you're going to speak against it, it's probably worth just holding your fire
Okay.
until we get to number 3.
Okay,
And I think this is an appropriate time as well, just to make it simple for the public to speak to any one of these. There was opportunity for public input at the committee of the whole. So if there's any members of the public that wish to address us here, again, you can raise your hand within the Zoom application, or you can hit *9 if you're calling into the call. I don't, Ms. Williams, has anybody raised their hand or indicated through the *9 that they wish to speak to this item?
Nobody, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. I'm not surprised. Again, we had opportunity for public input at that. So I'm going to then go through and call these one by one in terms of motions. So I'm separating them, and we'll address them in that way. Councillor Ney, are you okay talking to item number 3 when that gets moved then?
the third
Yeah.
recommendation, yeah.
Ms. Williams, just for my clarification, so I don't make a procedural mistake here, the whole 4 have been moved. If I separate them, do I need a mover and seconder for each of them individually then? Is that the simplest way to going about it?
Yes, Your Worship. There was a request to sever, so we're back to square one. And
Okay.
can I suggest that the first 2 be dealt with as one, because they were one motion or one recommendation coming forward from committee of the whole?
Sure. So I'm happy. So we'll take a motion for items 1 and 2.
Would this be a motion to divide the question?
Actually, Ms. Williams, is it at my discretion to separate this into multiple motions, or do I need a motion to separate?
It could be at your discretion, or if a council member requests that it be severed, then you would sever it. And so there was a request. So they're considered severed at this time, and we're back to the beginning.
So I have, as a chair, I've decided that I'm severing them. So I will treat treat a motion for 1 and 2 that staff report back with costs and timelines, and that the analysis include options for noise reduction. Is there a mover and a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. I see 2 hands up on that one. Councillor Green.
Yes, sorry, I was confused. Do I need to withdraw my original motion then?
No, no. It's just essentially I've separated it, and it's now
Okay.
we're just dealing with the first part now. So the motion that's live on the floor is to report back with cost and timeline options and include noise reduction measures in that. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. It looks to me that the response to this particular motion is just a few steps further along in this particular agenda.
It is.
It would be terrible if we did not approve this, since the report is just further down on this agenda.
Yeah, it's unusual procedurally to have something so fast, which is why it's throwing us off a little bit, I think, in procedure. I don't see any other discussion on this item, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. Item number 3, staff provide options for pickleball for evenings each week. I think appropriate to have that motion made, and then we can make amendments to it. So it's moved and seconded. Is this mover or seconded want to address it, or if not, I'll go to Councillor Ney. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Yeah, so yeah, I know we did come to this conclusion to send this back to staff, but upon sort of reviewing that evening and our decision-making process, I went back to the staff recommendation that reads that council directs staff to enact closure of the pickleball and tennis courts at Carnarvon Park from 6 to 9 a.m. from May 1 to October 21, and thought that we in my mind may have acted a little bit more hastily. I mean, the main issue was the closure of the tennis courts, not the closure of the pickleball. And the staff report and analysis and the work that staff had done came up with the compromise of closing the pickleball court from 6 to 9 a.m., which seemed to be a good compromise for the pickleball players as well as the neighbors until another remedy was in hand. And so at this point, it's reverted back to the status quo of a 4 o'clock closure, which the stories I'm hearing is just, it's way too early to close the pickleball court at 4 o'clock. So I'd like to put a motion that we, if I may, Mr. Mayor,
Well,
can I put a motion or just speak to it?
You may,
right
but
now?
I think that the, you may absolutely make a motion. I just want to get clarification on that, because that's not my recollection of what the status quo is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, well, I believe it's gone back to 4 o'clock. Maybe I should check with staff.
So I just want to, I don't know if we have, we must have one of the members of Parks, Rec and Culture here with Mr. Meikle, I believe, is probably with us. Perhaps could express to us what is the current status quo. I think that's important for us to understand.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. And right now, the status quo is the courts are open, and as of 4 p.m., we are asking players to use the foam balls. So it's not that the courts are closed. We are just asking pickleball players to use foam balls after 4 p.m. And that's been met with mixed results, to say the least. It's certainly not favored by pickleball players, but has helped somewhat, I guess, from the neighbor's perspective. So that's the current situation.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. So we're clear on that. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
So I think what I'm asking, what I think would be, in my view, that we go to the staff recommendation of a 6 o'clock, that the pickleball players can play up to 6 o'clock and use the foam balls thereafter. I mean, that's the recommendation that staff came up with, as I say, after doing the analysis, talking with the neighbors, talking with the pickleball player, and was the compromised option. What I was opposed to was closing down the tennis courts as well. So what I would be proposing is that we go with the staff recommendation minus the closure of the tennis courts and make the pickleball, keep the courts open, but do what staff is recommending right now, and that is to make the recommendation to use the foam balls after 6 o'clock, not after 4 o'clock. My sense is there'd be a lot more buy-in with the pickleball players to just provide that compromise, because that was the original objection that brought the report forward in the first place, as I understand it.
I'm just trying to think here from a procedural piece. The options for pickleball free evenings each week was basically, this is to direct staff to bring back options for that. I think we're not making a decision here at all. So it's just really to include options for staff to bring back for, for us to analyze. So I think what I can do is I don't think we need a motion to adjust this one for options. I think what we can do is we can make a motion to add that option into the list of options for staff to bring back.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. And can we ask Mr. Mayor, like, I appreciate how quickly staff is bringing this other piece forward around the, about the lacrosse box, but can we ask how far away out that recommendation would be? Because as we know, pickleball, they're all out on the courts now. This is the season and they're pretty keen. So I was just wondering if we could get some kind of timeline from staff when they're able to bring those options back as well.
Sure. I
So
think
one thing at a
we
time.
have timelines on the pickleball court in the lacrosse box, because that's in 6.4.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, Mr. Meikle, do you have a sense of when these other options, some or all, will come back to council for consideration?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have a clear timeline at this point. We could, I'd have to look into what the next best opportunity to do so would be. It would be, wouldn't take overly long. I would suggest a couple of weeks or so, but I think some of that will kind of depend on the outcome of the item 6.4, to be honest.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. I think in fairness to staff, this set of recommendations will go forward. Depending on what happens with 6.4, we may want to reconsider some of this direction, and we can do that at that time. Normally, this is sort of a procedural piece to move it forward, and if as Councillor Nay wishes, the option is there for adding or removing some of those directions at this table.
So, Mr. Mayor, may I make an amendment to add to that motion, and that staff consider the closure of the pickleball court with softball only from 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. from May 1 to October 1, 2021.
Well, what I'll do, I think, Councillor Nay, knowing that you wish to add that option as one coming forward, I'll deal with the motion that's on the. It doesn't contradict from this motion. It's just, which is just asking for those options, and I'll just have that as a possible addition to the list of requests coming forward to staff. So at this point, we have the motion, this part segmented motion that staff provide options for pickleball free evenings each week, and that staff report will come back in future. So that's the motion that's live on the floor. I have Councillor Zelka with your hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and I certainly appreciate hearing another motion put forward by Councillor Nay at the appropriate time. Regarding this particular motion, I won't be able to support it since pandemic and all those sort of things. Definitely want to see our parks in use as much as possible. So I do look forward to supporting some of the other suggestions that are being put forward, but this one I can't support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion on this?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Yeah, for same reasons actually, Councillor Zelka's just expressed. I'm not in favor of this motion either. I'd like to see it move more quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. I don't see any other discussion. I'm supportive of the motion. I think that it's just asking for options here, what that might look like. I have a feeling it might be made moot by 6.4 if we can find an alternate solution, but depending on how that goes, I think this should sit live and give us another option. And it may, in fact, allow for us to expand pickleball use a little bit beyond for some evenings and not others, if that's the option, to help enhance the amount of pickleball. So I'm okay with it staying in for now, and we'll just see how the report comes back at that time. Any other discussion on this? Not seeing any. All those in favor? And opposed? I have Councillor Zelka and Councillor Nay opposed, so that passes. And the last of these recommendation here, and then we'll get to the additional motion. I know we have at least one, which is the staff provide information on the costing of alternate location in the area of Henderson Rec Center. So moved, Councillor Braithwaite, is there a seconder? Seconded, thank you. Any other discussion on this? Not seeing any. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. Now, Councillor Nay, you wish to make a motion, and this is to have staff bring back options for changing the hours of softball only use at Carnarvon. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that we ask staff to restrict pickleball playing to foam balls only at Carnarvon Park between 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. daily from May 1, 2021 to October 1, 2021.
So are you making a motion to change that policy here, or to ask staff to come back with that as one of the options coming forward?
Well, let's try and change it here. No, that was the staff recommendation. So, and it seemed reasonable to me. They've done the analysis. I'd like to put that to the council now. If there's a seconder.
Is there a seconder for that motion? I don't see a seconder for that motion, Councillor Nay.
Okay.
I might give you if you wish to reword it to have it come back as an option. I think
Okay.
you probably have more support for as a
Okay, let's
report.
give that a shot. So that we ask, the council direct staff to consider restricting pickleball use with a foam ball only at Carnarvon Park from 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. daily from May 1 through to October 1, 2021.
To include that as an option.
As an option.
Is it a seconder, Councillor Green? Okay, thanks. Just moved and seconded. Any other discussion on this item? Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you, Mayor. I just lost everybody. I'm gonna probably vote in favor of this, I think. But I just wanted to clarify that the original motion, I think that staff brought forward was actually to not allow any pickleball playing from 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. It wasn't for the use of a soft ball. The soft ball was basically for use after 4 p.m. So I'm just wanting clarification on that, because I don't think it was ever on the table to have the soft ball used after 6 p.m. I don't think. I'm trying to remember what the actual motion was last time.
I think you're right, Councillor Braithwaite, because they were going to close the entire court.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
At 6 o'clock.
Okay. And just one other comment. I'm wondering if, depending on what happens with 6.4, whether this will also become inconsequential to have a softball used after 6, since this court will, if 6.4 passes, be moved a much greater distance away from houses. So it might be that this isn't needed even.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I appreciate this is a little awkward just because we don't have that the same staff report in front of us. That work was done at the committee of the whole table, but I think asking for additional options is never too objectionable to include back amongst the options that staff brings back, and it's not frankly a far departure from what we have there currently in terms of the policy. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. For the benefit of the public listening in, I was wondering if it's possible to have staff comment on there was a request to reconstitute the Parks, Rec and Culture Committee, and of course, once that's done, these sort of issues will eventually go there with full discussion, and then recommendations will of course come to council. So we don't have to deal with this sort of minutia at this time. I was wondering if it's possible to just share when the Parks, Rec and Culture Committee might be reconstituted, or when it's on the plan to be reconstituted, please.
Sure. Perhaps I can go to staff for a timeline, but I just want to make clear for anybody watching, there is an intention for staff to bring back information on options for a number of, or at least 2 committees that have been asked for consideration. One is a Parks Rec and Culture Committee to handle in some, but the mandate for that has not yet been set. So we're very early stages right now, and council may or may not decide to do that. And similarly for a finance committee, again, report back. And, I think at the end of the day, this body will have to determine what that body, if formed, would do, and then they would form the body to meet those needs. So we're a little ways away from that yet, but this body, as council, has directed staff to complete the orientation of the constituted bodies first, and then undertake that. So we're just completing that process right now. But perhaps staff could provide a more specific timeline for when reports on the additional bodies might come forward. I believe it would be before summer, but that's about as accurate as I can get. I see a number of staff online. I'm not sure who would be best suited to be able to answer the timeline question.
Your Worship.
Go ahead, Ms. Varela.
Thank you very much. So as you explained, Council did provide direction to onboard the existing committees first, then subsequently bring the potential for additional committees back to Council for their governance decision-making. That will include resourcing discussions and things like that. So again, I can't commit to a timeline right now. Likely, I would see it in the fall rather than the summer, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Varela.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on this motion, which is to include an option for softballs after 6, essentially in the report back? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. So that'll come back. Any other motions or things arising from this? If not, then that would be the conclusion of this agenda item, and we'll move on to item number 6.3. In hindsight, we probably should have put 6.4 after this one, so we could have dealt with them back to back. But we will now move to the Managing Urban Wildlife Trapping in Oak Bay. Again, if anybody from the public wishes to speak, I would ask you to call in or raise your hand within the app right now. This was dealt with at length at the committee of the whole. So generally speaking, one motion that staff amend the existing animal control bylaw and implement the following short-term mitigations with as laid out in this report would be sufficient. We don't need to go through them all one by one. But I just, so I'm happy to take any questions of council, and again, any members of the public who wish to address us are more than welcome to do so. Just raise your hand at this time. I have Councillor Appleton, Patterson, then Zelka.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to clarify, we're going to be voting separately on the first recommendation, which is quite lengthy, and then the second recommendation. There's kind of two recommendations included here. We're going to vote separately on those.
Just a second here. Let me just bring up my my agenda package, which I managed to escape from.
The first recommendations basically referring to amending the existing bylaw with short-term mitigations with the list of those mitigations. And then the second recommendation being that the animal control bylaw be amended to include the following restriction. So two different components there.
Yes. We can still do them all as one recommendation.
Well, I was asking because my preference would be to vote on them separately. So I would ask that they be separated.
I have no issue with separating them, and you're happy to do one as a block and then the second recommendation separately.
Well, I think that the first recommendation is just a single recommendation with a bunch of subcomponents to it, and then sort of how it's presented here is that there's one standalone second recommendation.
That's fine. I'm happy to sever those things. We haven't had a motion on the table yet, so that's very easy to do. We'll just take a motion for the first block and then the second. But
Thank you,
at this point, okay. Go ahead. I have Patterson, then Zelka.
Yes, unmuted here, and I thank Councillor Appleton for that, because I just wanted to clarify that too. And perhaps, I don't know if this will come up as we're talking about it, but when it said provide information for the public on reporting animal control and noise bylaw infractions, if we are going to have something more fulsome than just that, but a little more clarification as to what type of information that will actually be, what the exact information will be that the public would get on reporting animal control and noise bylaw infractions.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I don't have that information handy. I think that's normally something we would allow staff to do, but I think we have. I'm not sure who is here to answer the questions on that item tonight, but I believe probably Ms. Winter.
Your Worship.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Varela.
So you're right. The usual process is council would provide the direction, staff would go away and develop the information, and then it would be posted on the website and other places as for ease of access for the public. So again, that information hasn't been drafted yet.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So then, just for clarification, should we be providing more fulsome direction here than tonight, or should we wait until it all comes back? Just wait a little.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Patterson, we are a governance body. We give direction to staff to do this. I think this is not the right place for us to be delving into I want it on this part of the website, et cetera. And once it's done, if we have some suggestions, staff always, if we have good ideas, you don't have to do it through council. We can always just share it with them, and they'll always work to make it as effective as possible.
Thank you. I was hoping that was the response I was going to get, but I just wanted to clarify it so that I knew that was in fact the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Zelka. Then,
thank you very much, Chair. First of all, let me say thank you to members of the public and Councillor Green for bringing forward this issue, and I very much support these additions and changes to our animal control bylaws. I raised a question with staff, and I'll ask the question in public with respect to First Nations rights. But the only concern I had with these adjustments relating to trapping had to do with the reconciliation aspects, integral to the identity of First Nations and also core to many of their legal rights and responsibilities as protected by the Charter and treaty, is tied in with hunting and trapping and access to lands for those purposes. And I just wanted to ask staff if they could comment and share how I know in some ways, I guess bylaws can't impinge upon treaty rights, but if staff could share how this would tie in with any reconciliation aspects of First Nations rights, if any.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Zalka. And Ms. Varela, is it you or would it be Ms. Winter that would answer the question?
Happy to take that, Your Worship.
Go ahead, Ms. Varela.
The Canadian Constitution and provincial legislation takes precedence over Oak Bay bylaws when it comes to the rights of Indigenous peoples. Should Council approve the recommendations with respect to amendments to the animal control bylaw this evening, staff will ensure that we incorporate any relevant best practices and/or language related to Indigenous peoples' rights when drafting the amending bylaw.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Ms. Winter, your microphone is on and we're picking up a little bit of background noise. Yeah, thank you just for muting that. Go ahead, Councillor Zalka.
Oh, thank you. One last thing, if I may. I'm happy with the wording in general. I'm happy with the instructions in general. The second recommendation talks about two classes of people, and I worry that in some ways excludes First Nations. So I would hope that's part of the best practices in the wording that that we can talk about the wording there that doesn't in any way set an expectation where First Nations feel their rights are being impinged. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zalka. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a procedural question. I don't mean to put staff on the spot about this one, but I'm just noting that the minutes from the committee of the whole meeting where this was discussed haven't actually come forward for acceptance by council as of yet, unless I've missed it, but those haven't actually been formally accepted by council as yet. I'm just wondering, I know that draft versions are available on the website, but I'm just wondering whether that has any effect on our discussion here.
Sure, it's a worthwhile question to ask, just so the public understands how this information flows. And I'm going to turn over to Ms. Williams to answer that question.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to council. Historically, at the district, committee of the whole minutes came to council as soon as they were finally prepared. With the new procedure bylaw that was adopted recently, committee of the whole now adopts their own minutes. But oftentimes items of business in the form of recommendations need to come forward in a more timely manner. So it is a little bit awkward. You'll see a recommendation coming forward to council for consideration prior to seeing their minutes. But if you bear in mind that the purpose of receiving their minutes now is just for information, it's not for adoption. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Yeah, and in the past process, we did essentially adopt recommendations from the committee of the whole just by adopting the minutes. So that practice is no longer there. Does that help, Councillor Appleton?
Understood, Your Worship. Yep, new procedure bylaw, new process.
Thank you. Any other discussion? We don't have a motion on the floor just yet, so I'm going to go to the members of the public. If anybody wishes to address council, you're more than welcome to do so. Again, you can hit *9 to raise your hand if you're calling in, or you can, if you're on the Zoom application, you can use the raise hand function available within the application. That's found under reactions at the bottom of the screen. I don't see any callers called in on this call, so I'm assuming no hands will be raised. Mrs. Williams, is there any members of the public have indicated their intention to speak?
At this time, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. So back to this table. The request was made to consider two motions, so I would follow that advice. We'll consider if a member of council would so move the first portion to amend as laid out there, but not the second recommendation at this time. Moved by Councillor Green, seconded, thank you. Any further discussion on that slate of changes? Not seeing any, I will call the question. Oh, sorry, Councillor Green. Nope, just about to vote. Trying to move things along quickly. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And then we have the second recommendation. Probably worth making a motion to put on the table, and then we can have discussion, as there's been some have expressed some desire to change the wording or just want to make some clarification in that wording. Is there a mover? Moved. Thank you, Councillor Green. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Thank you. The motion is now live. Does anybody wishes to speak to this? As the mover, Councillor Green, do you wish to say anything, or should we go to other speakers?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mayor. You can go to other speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So speaking against the motion, similarly to my comments that I made at Committee of the Whole, this recommendation essentially prohibits citizens in Oak Bay, individual citizens, from setting up traps to deal with nuisance wildlife, and instead creates a process whereby they have to secure a permit, which notwithstanding requires potential institutional time or potential staff time at the district. I feel this is an undue limitation on citizens in Oak Bay to be able to deal with nuisance wildlife in a timely fashion. If you have rats in your basement, if you've got squirrels digging into your roof, or you've got raccoons taking apart your roof shakes, which of all things that I've personally experienced, you need that dealt with immediately, because there's a immediate risk to property damage. So I do not support the requirement that individual citizens cannot take action to protect their property by trapping nuisance wildlife where appropriate. And I think I'm very much in support of the general theme of these amendments. And I think we all understand there's a real interest in doing away with inhumane methods of trapping and making sure things are done in a humane fashion. That's not at issue here. I'm just talking about the timeliness of being able to act when you have an imminent threat to your property. So I think that unfortunately is what's implied here. And that I think that I am concerned that residents, if faced with a potentially onerous process, are more likely to not follow the rules or adopt methods of trapping and doing away with nuisance animals that are not consistent with what we're hoping to achieve with this bylaw. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I'll go to Councillor Zelka, and then I'm going to go back to Ms. Winter just to get some clarification, because my memory is obviously not that good, because I'm trying to remember, we know what class of animals this applies to, just because I'm curious under that consideration. I think you raised some valid points, Councillor Appleton. I know some of this was discussed at the last meeting, but I can't remember the outcome. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I thank the previous councillor for bringing forward the same concern that I had initially. I had to do a fairly close reading. The motion we just approved has a very convenient definition of trap, and I do notice that in the definition of trap, it does not include cage and box traps, does not include nets, suitcase live traps, it does not include beaver traps, does not include mouse or rat traps. So a trap basically are only those that appear to cause, I would characterize it as causing pain. I actually have some of these traps that are allowed under the new definition of trap, and I will continue to use them even after we pass this bylaw, as without being in contravention of anything that we approve here. So for that reason, I will be supporting this recommendation going forward. That was the first point I wanted to make. Did staff wish to comment on that before I continue?
No, go ahead, Councillor Zelka. We'll go to Ms. Winter afterwards just for final clarification.
All right, thank you. And the second thing is with respect to the two classes that people mentioned specifically in this wording, the third class would be First Nations. I trust staff is going to trust staff is going to incorporate any relevant best practices and/or language related to Indigenous rights when drafting the amending bylaw, and I do look forward to that wording when it comes forward. Therefore, I won't be passing an amendment with respect to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Ms. Winter, just can you address the concerns raised by Councillor Appleton on this, where the cutoff is for setting a trap, what animals are included in that, et cetera?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'm happy to do that. And this specifically relates to Class B animals, which would not include, say, rats and mice, for example, with respect to the setting of a trap. But it would relate to raccoons, squirrels, those kinds of animals. The idea being that rather that you would call an agency that has the capacity to deal with those animals rather than trapping them yourself. Does that help?
It does help, thank you. But can you just be clear on that one? Is that like things like squirrels and addicts tend to get dealt with by pest control, not conservation officers? So is that
that's right?
Is their position considered included within that description?
Pest control agencies, absolutely. In order to operate, they are required to have the appropriate permits in place.
Okay.
Is that the question that you were asking, Your Worship?
It was. I think you answered it. So thank you. I think that's as clear as we'll get here. Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I will be supporting the motion, obviously. This was prompted by practices that fell outside the humane practice of trapping. And because we were silent on the whole area or issue of trapping these kinds of animals, it was certainly time to address that issue. And as you know, I'm grateful to you as well. It was the mayor who brought this to my attention initially and asked for some support on this. And so we both worked with some residents who were very negatively affected by this. I also think the intent of this bylaw is to discourage homeowners from taking matters into their own hands when they don't have the proper equipment or they don't have the proper knowledge. And some of these animals can be potentially hazardous if they have rabies, for instance. So I think it's always wise to deal in issues like this with professionals. And I think this was one of the things that prompted us to relook at this. And I'm very grateful to Ms. Winter for her report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Ms. Green, Councillor Green. Ms. Winter, you have your hand raised again. Did you wish to add anything?
If I may, Your Worship, if it's appropriate.
You may.
I wanted to point out also that some of this recommendation did come from lengthy consultation with provincial conservation officers, but will be reviewed, I believe, by the district's legal staff, as well as there will be further discussion with the province in drafting any amending bylaw.
Thank you, Ms. Winter. So in that process, it would come back because it'd be a bylaw amendment that would come back for council's consideration at that point. Is that correct?
I believe so. That's correct, Your Worship. You're just giving direction to the staff to create the bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on this item? Not seeing any. I'll just make one brief comment. I fully agree with Councillor Appleton that we do not want bylaws that overstep the bounds. We can very quickly, with good intentions, create a nightmare for residents if we're not very careful. So I'll support the motion. I'll look forward to seeing this be because of the words that come back in those bylaw changes, because I think that's where we have to consider those specifics. And if we can't meet a reasonable balance, then that's the point I would have to reconsider that direction. But so thank you. Not seeing any other hands on this. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Appleton opposed, so that passes. That ends area as item 6.3. We will move on to item 6.4. A little bit of deja vu here, but with the staff report on the relocation of pickleball courts at Carnarvon Park. Mr. Meikle, first, thank you for bringing this back so quickly. I think it's worthy for anybody watching to understand what it is that's in front of council tonight.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can provide an overview here of So staff are seeking approval for the budget to move the pickleball courts from their current location to the lacrosse box location at Carnarvon Park, and seeking direction as to the approved funding source for that move. I appreciate the unusual nature of bringing this forward at this time, given as we saw the other recommendations from the Committee of the Whole on tonight's agenda. However, it was expedited as that we have an opportunity, a potential opportunity to capitalize on work that is currently being done at Windsor Park, resurfacing of the Windsor Park tennis courts. And this move would potentially provide some potential to address the noise implications of pickleball by increasing that distance between the pickleball courts and the neighbors, as discussed previously. As to the second part of the recommendation, which spoke to the additional techniques or methods, processes for noise attenuation, we're still in the process of investigating those additional methods, but it'd be important to note that this is an opportunity to actually assess that impact of the increased distance, and also this would provide about a 4 to 5 foot wall that's existing within the lacrosse box. So it would give staff a chance to assess the impact on the noise implications of that move to this location, which was recommended as part of the approved Carnarvon Park master plan. So with that in mind, as I said, this request for approval was expedited in order to try to address this situation at the earliest possible opportunity, and given the trying to find a contractor and to fit that into this window at this time, we were able to bring it forward now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. Are there questions of council to staff? And again, I'll just remind the public that this is subject to public input. If there's anybody from the public that wishes to address council on this agenda item, you're more than welcome to do so. You can call into the number provided and then hit *9 to raise your hand. We will start off, however, with our councillors asking questions. I'll go in the order on my screen here: Councillor Braithwaite, Patterson, then Appleton.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Meikle. Mr. Meikle, can you tell me, I understand that you're budgeting about $65,000 for this to go through. Can you tell me where the $65,000 is coming from?
Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Braithwaite. And you may be for our Director of Finance to speak to as well. But my understanding would be either from the district's accumulated surplus reserve and or the district's allocation of the COVID-19 restart grant as outlined in the report.
And I will just say, I think if this direction is given, I would ask for a secondary motion just to give some direction to staff about where we would like to pull those funds from. But does that answer the question, Councillor Braithwaite?
Yeah, thank you. And then I do just have one more question as well. I understand that you're only going to be using, or you're suggesting that we only use a portion of the lacrosse box. And was there any consideration given to using a greater portion of the lacrosse box to add perhaps an additional court? But maybe you'll also want to touch on how much that lacrosse box is used, and whether or not that would, if we did take up more space in the lacrosse box, whether that would impede use by other individuals.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Meikle.
Thank you. Sorry, that wasn't. Sorry about that. COVID-19.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, staff, for reading that. Go ahead, Mr. Meikle.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Sorry about that. I'm not sure where that came from. Yes, the consideration to only use part of the lacrosse box, or a portion of it, and it's about 2/3 approximately, was to leave some space for other available uses. As we know, the park is generally well used. We're in the process of studying usage down there. We've both of tennis players, pickleball players, and other uses in all the court areas, and including the lacrosse box. We've seen some, informal family games of families playing street hockey, some folks that bring their young children to ride their bikes in the lacrosse box area. those kinds of uses as well. So certainly taking the whole lacrosse box for pickleball would push those users out of there potentially and would restrict other uses. So we are trying to find a balance of use in that space there.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. Mr.
Thank
Meikle,
you.
can you just go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, sorry.
I wanted to reiterate your comments on how quickly staff turned this around and just to thank them for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Just for our clarification, Mr. Meikle, how many courts could the lacrosse court handle if fully utilized for pickleball?
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly could handle 5. The 6th is a possibility where it would be a tight squeeze in there, and we probably wouldn't meet the what's called the overrun space on all 6 of the courts. But we're close. 5 certainly, and 6 is unknown, uncertain at this time.
Thank you very much for the clarification. Go ahead. I have Councillor Patterson, then Appleton.
Thank you, Mayor, and I too thank Mr. Meikle for bringing this report back to council so quickly. I do have a few questions on this. One thing that I am trying to understand is for recreational sports, and obviously there are recreational facilities, outdoors, indoors for these. But I'm really not familiar with what process the district has and the park staff have for considering the implementation of a new sport in a facility and the criteria they would use to evaluate what they would recommend to council. So that's one thing that I would like some clarity on. And if the proposed distance is in line with any recommended distances for the sports from perhaps a recreational facility adjacent to a residential area, if the direction of play influences the noise on the courts, and if the number of courts are increased, do we understand the extent of the exponentially how much more noise we could expect? And then the last question I have really is, if council approves this and it goes forward, what are the intended outcomes that might be considered and followed up with a report to council? So those are my questions. There's a few, but we'll let staff get going on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Patterson. I may need to ask for clarification on a couple of questions there. Yeah. My apologies. So in terms of, as I mentioned, we're only bringing forward the initial portion of that recommendation to move the court. We are still investigating and researching the other section of that recommendation around the noise attenuation options and methods. So I don't have a great deal of information to bring forward at this time. We are, as I say, just in the process of researching that. So my understanding in terms of a distance and the impact on noise is just the general principle that the farther away you go, it decreases the noise impact, the noise implications. So I'm not aware of, and again, we haven't had the opportunity at this point to engage a consultant in any way in this work to determine those exact standards of what that would look like. So I cannot comment on that at this time. The direction of the court, my understanding, does not have a particular impact on noise. It does, however, have a particular impact on play from the pickleball players' perspective. And so there is a preferred direction of the court, and we are maintaining the direction of the court that they currently are, which is, my understanding, is the preferred direction of play for the players themselves. And then In terms of, I think the other question was around outcomes. I think that would really depend on what outcomes council is interested in. We certainly are interested in the participation levels and, of course, the impact, understanding the impact on neighbors. We would like to be able to get some measurements before, if this proposed move is approved, we would take some measurements in the current situation, decibel readings, for example, of the noise level currently and at that fence along the neighbor's fence line, and what that looks like with a move into the future. So we'd be able to at least speak to what difference that may have, the move plus the addition of the existing lacrosse box walls. Now, in terms of planning for new sports that may come up, such as this, it's always a difficult one, and especially with pickleball's been a really interesting example because of the exponential growth. I mean, it's grown very rapidly. We certainly have, seen how popular it is. Part of those processes occur. So the Carnarvon Park Master Plan, for example, went through a fairly lengthy consultation process, and pickleball players, pickleball association, tennis players, a number of all sports users down there, as well as the residents and neighborhood, were all part of that engagement and consultation process. So that's where some of these things sometimes get unearthed, so to speak, but really difficult to predict what will be the next popular sport. In some ways, we in recreation play a role in introducing those new sports. And for example, there's a couple of different racket sports that in some of the preliminary work we've done in looking at that other recommendation around pickleball free evenings, there's a couple of different racket sports that we might be looking to hold classes in and introduce to the public, so to speak. So that is one way that sometimes that happens. So we actually do play a role in one of our mandates is to introduce people to sports and different activities in the community. I hope that if I missed questions there, please let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. Go ahead, Mr. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, no, thank you very much for that response, Mr. Meikle. I think you were quite thorough in giving us an overview on what our recreational staff are, attempting to achieve with this. So that's good to know, and maybe we can solve this problem before we undertake consideration of any new racket sports for the courts. But I think it's good to know that it will be monitored, and that we will be having some report back to council on what the findings are. I guess on this, I certainly am empathetic with the neighbors who also, because yes, we are in a pandemic, and so I appreciate that the players would like to have the outdoor sport activity, and it's great for health and overall well-being. However, perhaps, if you live adjacent to it and it's in a pandemic, there could be higher stress levels too. So it's, and here at council, we are of course tasked with trying to find that measured balance of addressing both concerns. So thank you for the comment, and I look forward to finding out the decision by council on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Appleton up next.
Thank you, Worship.
I also want to just there's a member of the public who's indicated they wish to speak, ending with phone number ending with 144. I will call on them as well. So just wait a few minutes and we'll get to you as well. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just through you to staff. So I think Mr. Meikle touched on this, but I just wanted to confirm that sort of the approach here is I'm pleased to hear that there's the interest in sort of taking some noise readings, the current situation and the relocated situation. So I guess what I'm hearing here, just to confirm, is that there's, that there would also be another iterative process to check after, like, is the idea implement in the existing lacrosse box space, and then potentially evaluate the noise impact with the neighbors, and then evaluate the potential whether or not, like maybe we've accomplished the goal, that would be fantastic if you accomplished the goal, but then basically going through that process of deciding whether or not that additional noise attenuation is necessary or not. So is that sort of the general approach that's being proposed here?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Councillor Appleton. Yes, yes, that is correct. That is the proposed approach here would allow us to do some analysis as we move forward and then determine what the best next steps would be if there isn't a significant enough impact on noise implications there.
So thank you for that. And through Your Worship, just one other, related point is there's some, just in terms of the language that used in the report, it basically talks about the further analysis of noise reduction methods and then additional report to council as necessary. Now, as I understand the recommendation from committee a whole and the recommendation that we just passed earlier this meeting, it specifically references an evaluation of noise attenuation methods. So I guess no matter what, irrespective of how successful, I guess, the initial relocation is, if passed, there would still be a report coming back from, I guess I'm still expecting a report to look at noise attenuation options, like in terms of what structural things could be done. So that's going to be expected regardless.
Sure. Thanks for the question of clarification, Mr. Meikle. Can you just confirm that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that is my understanding as well. We would still be looking to, or still be expected to bring that forward. We generally, and again, the unusual nature of bringing this forward now was really just about the availability of the contractor to do the work and believing that we could potentially capitalize on that opportunity to address an issue as soon as possible. But had we taken the time to further investigate the noise attenuation, we would have missed this window of opportunity. So that's where we're at with that one. But yes, that's my understanding.
Thank you, Your Worship, and absolutely, as other councillors have stated, I'm super grateful for staff taking advantage of this opportunity and moving this forward quickly. It's a great advantage, so I'm very appreciative of that. I guess my final question would be, the structural design of the lacrosse box would seem to provide an opportunity to kind of have a structural surface, I guess, for installing some type of noise attenuation or some type of screening. And there's probably different options in that regard. I guess whether staff could comment on whether or not, I mean, I know the lacrosse box is in not ideal shape, so I'm just wondering whether structurally it's able to even support that type of thing. Like, are we looking at, to implement noise attenuation screening, do we have to rebuild the lacrosse box at the same time?
Thanks, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. My understanding is that, again, in a preliminary look, we've started that exploration of options out there, and that would be a consideration we would have to make as to whether one of the options meant that, or one of the options could not be supported structurally by the existing fence line that's there, the existing structure of the lacrosse box. What we've seen thus far is there's options anywhere from essentially it's a curtain kind of idea that would seem to be able to be supported by the existing structure to more heavier materials to be used, which that's part of what we're trying to investigate as to what would make sense there or not, and what has the actual impact or not. That's where we're at with it at this point.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you, Your
Meikle.
Worship. Thank you, Your Worship.
I took from that, great question. We don't know the answer to until they do some more work. So I look forward to hearing those responses. Councillor Ney?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. To staff, yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Meikle, for pivoting so quickly and bringing this to our attention. Really appreciate it, and also really for your efforts to really balance the interests of the neighbors and the aspirations of the pickleball. It's not an easy task, especially in a built-out urban area. But I really appreciate what the work you've done to get us to here. The question I have is I do appreciate what your recommendation is, to use half of that lacrosse court at this time, and you'll continue assessing the situation for mitigation of noise, etc. But if it were the case that you were to expand it, this is purely hypothetical. You've got a budget there of 65,000. You must have done some calculations based on sort of how to put this together. If it were to use the entire lacrosse space, how much more would it cost to get a fully built out pickleball court in that space? I think you said that if it was fully built out, it would be 6. Did I understand that correct? Possibly. And if you could build it out fully, how much extra money would it cost? Are you able to give an estimate of that?
Thank you, Councillor Nay. I probably, I would break it down into cost for 5 and cost for 6. Does it change the numbers very much, Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's our understanding at this point. So in this proposal, the whole of the lacrosse park is itself is getting resurfaced. So in order to add courts, we would be just painting the actual court dimensions on there. So the bottom line or foundational surface will be done on the whole of the lacrosse box. So the additional play area, if you like, or free space area would also be resurfaced with this current proposal. And then we would also have the costs of adding the posts and nets to it. It's approximately about between $3,000 and $4,000 per court.
Okay, thank you.
Additional to that.
So it's potentially, and I know that's not the staff recommendation, it is potentially expandable the way you're going about this. Would that be accurate to say?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that would be accurate to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. Just before I go to the caller, I appreciate everybody asking most of the questions I was going to ask. I think for people watching, it's important to know there's as we do have a change plan coming here, some of the maintenance on this area has not been kept up because of course these are, like the lacrosse block, intended to be removed in that master plan. So if you go there, as pointed out, there's some damage to the walls, etc. And can I just get some clarification? Is there a budget in this allocated for doing a bit of a patch up to make sure there's no sort of dangerous or particularly unseemly portions of that wall that could be addressed? And also, I'm just curious if there's been any consideration, and probably not relevant to today, but in terms of what would be done with the current courts in this scenario, would they just essentially revert back to tennis or for some other multi-use purpose? Has staff thought through that portion? Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, there is some budget to do some repairs to the current walls. We'll need to do some at in some of the lower areas of the wall to, I guess you could say, contain the surfacing materials. So there is some budget to do that. And this budget also includes converting the existing pickleball courts back to a tennis court. So we would actually, in theory, be adding another tennis court to the inventory of the district. So the existing 4 pickleball courts at Carnarvon Park would convert back to a tennis court and would be resurfaced as well as part of this existing budget that's come forward here.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. I understand the caller that was in here has decided to leave, so we're not going to have that person call in. But I will ask if there's any members of the public that wish to speak. This is the time to do so. And so I'll make that call again in case they had to leave briefly but want to come back again. I have Councillor Nay with you have your hand raised.
Sorry,
It's remaining? Okay, that's fine. I should pay more attention to see if you've left and come back again or just up. Ms. Varela, you had you wish to add something?
No, Your Worship, my apologies.
Okay, we've got hands popping up everywhere. I just want to make sure I'm giving everybody a chance to speak. I don't see any members of the public wishing to speak, so go ahead, Councillor Zelka, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Back in 6.2, we passed a motion asking for staff to possibly come forward with the costing of an alternate location for pickleball courts in the area of the Henderson Recreation Center. I imagine that won't happen for a while. In fact, it may not be for until another budget cycle. The work that's being done on the pickleball courts, it sounds like it might be a temporary process depending on what comes out of this process. I was wondering if staff could possibly speak to that, because I think we had a very, very rough estimate as to what it might cost at Henderson without really having any details. So somewhere well north of $100,000, if not more. But if staff was willing to share with possible some idea of when that report may come back and what might happen to this lacrosse location when that happens, please.
Sure. Mr. Meikle, there's somewhat this is, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Meikle, if you have some sense of timeline. I guess for a report, I think the timeline on implementation would be really up to council, but go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Zelka. I would say timeline for a report regarding the what I would term the larger move to new courts at Henderson would be with the next budget cycle. It is order of magnitude cost that we've investigated at this point is upwards of $250,000. Given that you're starting from having to build the base and you know, that's what we're looking into in terms of potential geotechnical issues, et cetera, and finding locations within the existing infrastructure at Henderson Park. So it would be, I think, with the budget submission for next year, it'd be the fall at the earliest, I would say, would be my estimation of time on that report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that information. It sounds to me like any of the work that we do in the lacrosse box area will certainly be a couple of years duration, if not longer. It just feels that way. I don't know what's going to happen, but the definition of temporary might be years. But anyway, thank you. I look forward to supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't see any other hands raised on this. Ms. Vrella, your hand is still showing up on my screen. If you can, I don't know if you have a chance to lower it because it pops you to the front of my discussion panel here. With that, is there looking for a mover at this point of any motion, and we'll get to that discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite. Oh, can you unmute?
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, I would like to make. Would you like me to do them both at once?
Why don't we do a motion to receive the report
Okay.
first? That's straightforward.
I'll move receipt of the staff report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the receipt? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, not opposed. And then we get to a motion to do something.
I'll move that the relocation of the pickleball courts at Carnarvon Park from their current location to a new location out inside the existing lacrosse box at Carnarvon Park be approved at a cost not to exceed $65,000.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. I presume in some ways time will be of the essence and that this will move forward as quickly as staff is able to expedite. I just wanted to know whether that was an assumption built into this or whether we had to specify any timelines. I guess a question through you to staff.
I don't believe we need to specify timelines, as there is there's a timeline for the resurfacing that they're going to have to try and accommodate with the thing. But Mr. Meikle, is that correct?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that is correct. We had provided a part of the reason we expedited and brought this report forward was that it looks as though there's a contractor potentially available in June here. So we'd be hoping to have it finished through mid-July.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to the staff member most appropriate. Could we just confirm in Councillor Braithwaite touched on this, but the account that the funds are being taken from
Sure.
for this?
procedurally, Councillor Patterson, I'm going to deal with that as a separate motion. If this passes, we'll give that direction of this. We can take one of those two options. If anybody wishes a different option, I would suggest we go back to Mr. Payne to get some clarification of the allowance of any other source. But we'll give that direction after this motion. Unless there's a councillor here whose vote on this portion would depend upon the source of that funding would be the other reason to move them together. So we have a motion on the table. Don't see any other hands up on it. I just want to get a sense from Mr. Meikle on one outstanding question I should have at the back of my mind. The notion was raised of leaving some of the lacrosse box free for other uses, for some of the community use, but it would seem that would be very cramped in that space, given there would be tents or nets up for the pickleball courts, etc. Is there, could perhaps you could just touch on that, what that would kind of look like? Would they be the four courts be painted at one end, and then one end of the court would be essentially left bare for general use? And if that is the case,
I'm trying
then...
to talk to the council.
Oh, okay, I see. We've had the caller call back in again, so I'll go back to them, but I'll just, in fact, I'll hold my question before I do that, just because we had such, we lost them one time. So if the caller, yes, you've just unmuted yourself, the caller with last three digits, 144, you are unmuted and able to speak to council. If I could just ask that you state your name and municipality of residence, and then feel free to address council.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Sylvia Bradley. I live in Oak Bay. I live about 5 minutes from Carnarvon Park. And the one thing, I've been listening to the whole conversation about pickleball, and I hear that staff are thinking of resurfacing the court where the pickleball was first put in. But what will happen to all the other courts? Because there are a great many Oak Bay people who used to play there. The reason they haven't been playing there is because the surface is unsafe.
It's a good question, Ms. Bradley. I'll go to Mr. Meikle on that one. Is there, you mentioned the comment about the repainting of the pickleball to tennis courts. Is the resurfacing a portion of the tennis courts part of this proposal as well, Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the conversion of the existing pickleball courts back to tennis courts would involve a resurfacing of those courts. So Carnarvon Park would get one tennis court that I would say has an improved surface. We also had done some repair work to that location, to those pickleball courts just a year ago now. So it would be an improved surface. As far as the other tennis courts at Carnarvon Park, that would be another substantial fix to some of those tennis courts and would require another proposal to come forward at time of budget. So we are looking at those options, and but at this current moment, that's not on the plate, and those would have to come forward in the next budget cycle if possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Meikle.
But those other courts have been quite badly damaged for some time, at least 7 years. So I guess I look at all the money going into pickleball. I'm wondering where the surfacing of the tennis courts is going to come from if the money is spent on, altering the lacrosse box and all that's intended there.
Thank you, Miss. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. It's just I used to play there. I sent actually an email, but I don't know what happened to it. But I used to have a group of 12 that played there. But gradually it got so difficult and people were falling. We decided not to play there anymore. And it hasn't improved since. We already went, when you were asking about things around the district, about 5 years ago. and there was sign up at the rec centre and sign up somewhere else in the village, and we all put that we would play there if the courts were resurfaced, the cracks and holes and various other things that are there. So I'm wondering if that can, in fact, be either at another time or added to resurfacing the pickleball court.
It's a good question, Ms. Bradley, and I'm going to actually go to Mr. Meikle, and just so for your information, I think I mentioned this earlier. Carnarvon's a bit of a tricky place because we have a plan to spend a bunch of money to upgrade the entire park and make a number of changes. So part of this, I guess the neglect of some of these factors are just from that, because they're going to be changing. But Mr. Meikle, can you give us, I'm somewhat familiar with the poor condition of those courts. I'm not sure what work was done last year to remediate some of the issues. And I'm not sure what the cost would look like, if you know, to consider resurfacing the tennis courts there as well, if we have any sort of sense of that, or if it's even possible with the contract that we're contemplating.
Thank you, Your Worship. As mentioned, there would be one tennis court would get resurfaced there as part of this current proposal. As you mentioned and alluded to, the park itself is under the proposed or under the approved Carnarvon Park Master Plan, which does propose moving things around in that park. So even this move of the tennis courts to the lacrosse box, as Councillor Zelka alluded to, is temporary. However, temporary is likely 3 to 5 years. And we are looking at that point, there would be further proposals come forward to council with some, that would follow what's in the Carnarvon Park Master Plan, which does involve moving the courts and shifting things around and creating new courts at that point. So that we're in a bit of an awkward time frame for that, but we're looking at a solution here that does provide an additional court that would have a better surface than those existing courts do. So tennis would have that additional court to it. And currently right now, as I say, we are in the process of studying and researching the use of those other courts of play altogether at Carnarvon Park. And we are seeing a significant amount of play on the existing courts at Carnarvon, the existing tennis courts, at Carnarvon Park. So they are in use and are playable. And I think the benefit of this proposal is that there is one tennis court that would be fully resurfaced and added to the inventory, if you like.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. Do you have any sense of cost of what it would? I mean, I guess there's cost, but also the possibility. We're asking the current contractor to extend to deal with these two pieces. Would they be able to, and do we have a sense of cost to resurface the other 4 tennis courts as well?
Thank you, Your Worship. As an example, as mentioned, the contractor is currently resurfacing Windsor Park tennis courts, which is 3 courts, and it is at about a similar cost to this, approximately $65,000. So it does involve crack repair there and resurfacing, etc. So,
okay. So to do those 4 additional courts, it would be somewhere exceeding the $65,000 number, in addition to the money we're talking about here.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. We have one other caller. I just want to make sure if anybody wishes to speak, this is the time to do it. Star 9 is the way that you would effectively raise your hand if you're calling in. If you hit star 9, it'll pop up on our screen as someone wishing to speak. I have a caller with the last 3 digits 012. If that caller would like to introduce yourself, just your name and your municipality of residence, you may address council at this time.
Thank you very much, Mayor Murdoch and council. My name is Trish Main. I am an Oak Bay resident. And I've written to you on several occasions about pickleball because my other hat, beyond being a resident of Oak Bay, is that I'm the president of the Victoria Regional Pickleball Association. I want to thank you for considering this solution to a problem that has been happening in Obey, conflict with the neighbors. I think this is a reasonable solution. I just would like to caution council, and I thank Mr. Meikle for his recommendation. I just want to caution council about encouraging multiple activities within the same enclosure. We have seen on pickleball courts in other parts of the city, kids riding bikes, jumping over nets with skateboards, and similar kinds of activities that could damage both the court surface and the nets. Now, I think I recall in Mr. Meikle's recommendation that there was going to be some sort of a separation. And I think if there's going to be any kind of multiple use of that enclosed space of the lacrosse box, that a separation would absolutely be required, and some signage saying the courts are to be used for pickleball only, to discourage the other things that might damage the surface and the equipment. Thank you very much again for considering this motion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Main, and thanks for calling in tonight. I don't see any other phone numbers that would raise their hand, but I'll make another call if anybody else wishes to call or speak to council. This is the last chance to do so. It would be if you've called in, it would be to hit *9 on your phone to raise your hand within the meeting. And I'll just go to Ms. Williams in case there's any other things that I can't see on my screen of members of the public wishing to call in.
Your worship, there are no additional members at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. The motion is now live. To approve this this reuse of the lacrosse box. Is there any other discussion at this point? Don't see any. I guess I'm just going to ask if there's any interest from this body in making this from a 4 to a 5 court change, so that this is more of sort of seen as the primary use of pickleball. And I raise that point because I think in many ways we're creating a very positive outcome here. If we can increase the number of pickleball courts by 1, if we can add a newly resurfaced tennis court in an area that needs it, and we're moving the courts away and looking at some noise mitigation, we have a chance of sort of addressing multiple factors with minimal cost. And if Mr. Meikle's correct, it adds about $3,500 for the paint. I don't think that's an excessive amount to be included. I guess the motion would have to be, extended to not exceed $70,000 in that case, because that would extend past it. But that was just my only other alternate I can think of that would be a possibility here, but I'm quite happy to support the motion as it stands if nothing else has changed. I saw a couple hands pop up. Councillor Braithwaite and then Councillor Name.
Yeah, I'm actually quite happy to move ahead with something like that. I think that I listened to what Ms. Bradley said about multiple uses on that small space that would be there. And I think it would be probably better just to have all pickleball courts there. So I would be happy to amend the motion to say not to exceed $70,000.
I'll second that. But
Moved seconded. I think implied in that, but is the motion to add 5 courts there and not to exceed 70,000?
Yes, sorry, to add 5 courts and not to exceed $70,000.
No, I suggested it, but I didn't put it by Mr. Meikle first. So I'm just going to, before I go any further, there's a motion to amend it. Mr. Meikle, is that a doable request?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe five courts is doable. It was the 6th that I was a little more uncertain of. We again, without having this approved, we haven't really been able to fully engage the contractor to do some specific work there, but we could certainly, our sense would be the space that's left there would certainly grant 1 more court.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Meikle. Sorry, Councillor Braithwaite, is there anything else you wish to add to that?
No, I guess that if there was a possibility of adding the 2 courts, that I would assume that Mr. Meikle would come back to us and let us know, and if there was money available for that, that we could possibly do that too.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor, you had your hand up, but I think you put it down again.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I think we've heard a compelling case to use out the whole space for one user group. And yeah, so if we can optimize that within that budget, that would be great.
Thanks, Councillor Ney. Councillor Appleton, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to clarify through you to staff, by expanding from 4 courts to 5 courts, we essentially use up that additional space. So by expanding by 4 to 5, we don't have that surplus space inside the box that's available for other uses. Do I understand that correct?
Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, essentially there would be space around the courts, but not really what I would call potentially usable space for games of roller or ball hockey, etc. So it wouldn't allow that kind of use any longer.
Mr. Meikle, just for our clarification, we can, I think, all visualize that lacrosse court. Would it be a series of north-south courts, sort of running 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 or 6 down the length of the court? Is that correct? There wouldn't be sort of top and bottom. There would just basically be room for one court all the way along. Is that accurate?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that is accurate. It would be a series of 5 in a row.
Okay, and so effectively the whole box would be divided down the middle by a series of nets.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, just to give people a visual of what the remaining space would look like. I think that's helpful. So go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I guess then following that question, we've got the amendment. Is the amendment live on the table? I think it is.
The amendment is been moved and seconded. Yes.
So then I would speak against the amendment, although I fully support that. There are pluses and minuses to this, and I appreciate the benefit of adding an additional court. I guess I would say that in my opinion, there is value in having that additional space. As far as I think particularly about both of my kids learning to ride their bikes in spaces like that. And actually I heard from folks during the Carnarvon master plan process that they really favored a paved path to run around the perimeter of the park for exactly that purpose. So in as much as those spaces kind of look a little neglected and seem like they're not getting used for much, they do serve a purpose. And I would rather err on the side of balance for uses than this particular option. But now that we've taken a positive step in the positive direction for pickleball, I think I would rather strive for balance, just in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I will also be speaking against the amended motion, certainly for the same rationale that Councillor Appleton just gave, because I also have neighbors that are in the process as they have young children learning to ride bicycles, that having some surface area is greatly appreciated. Also, because I think that we certainly on council are endeavoring to try and find the best of both worlds for residents and for pickleball players. But I think it would be very helpful to understand kind of apples to apples as to what we achieve by moving the courts. I think if we add additional play to the area, I don't know that will give us the some of the intended analysis that we want at the end of this as to what we have achieved. I think it would be very, very difficult for us to, in fact, go forward and be able to speak to that, because in fact, we're asking staff to increase the amount of play, and hence probably the increase of noise. So, I was happy to support striving to find a reasonable balance between all of the activities, but it comes back to my first question about how we make these decisions about how space is used on the recreational fields, and do so in recognition of other bylaws and other adjacent uses. And so, I don't want to be, I would perceive if we add court play to this, that we are in fact adding to a situation that really was never analyzed to start with. So I would be voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Zelka?
Very briefly, I'll be supporting the amended motion. Ms. Bradley of the Victoria Regional Pickleball Association, I found her words compelling. From a safety perspective, it would make sense for it to be dedicated use. And I have been by that facility quite a number of times over a number of years. It is almost never used. And so I'll be supporting that. And thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other comments on the motion? So this is the motion to amend to increase the amount of money and allow for 5 courts on that space. Councillor Green?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And my comments are very general, but and I will be supporting the amended motion. But I just wanted to say, I think this issue and others illustrate that we need that that voice from the community through a Parks and Rec body. And I think I would say that, it's very difficult to try and gauge public sentiment at a time when we're disconnected anyway. But I would just urge us to expedite or at least move as quickly as we can to restore some kind of body that will provide that community input and that public voice in our Parks and Rec planning. But I thank staff for doing all they've done up until now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't see any other hands up. I suggested it. I appreciate it. The motion being put on the table for consideration. And I really appreciate the comments made. I think they're good comments on both sides of this. I still think it's worth doing that. I think that if the courts aren't in use, then there's a large area that you could ride the entire circumference of that for kids riding bicycles or other types of uses. I don't think them riding around immediately adjacent to people playing is probably the right course of action. So in the entire space freed up would be that of about a tennis court, which isn't significant, but it would certainly be well used if it was pickleball. So I think my bigger concerns are more around the noise issue. If we increase the number of pickleball courts, will that significantly increase the amount of noise? I think it's more the type of noise than it is the number of courts, but I guess we'll wait and see on that one and try the noise mitigation and see those other pieces. So I'll be supporting the motion to amend as it stands based on the comments I've heard so far. So thank you. Any other discussion on this? On the amendment? So the amendment is to increase the amount of money and to add, make it 5 courts instead of 4 in the pickleball area. All those in favor of the amendment? And those opposed? I have 2, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Appleton opposed. So that does amend. So now we have an amended motion live on the table, which is as made originally, but now with the increased amount of money. So back to the main motion. Is there any discussion on this motion at this point? Don't see any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, everyone. That was a really good discussion and insight. I do need a follow-up motion, however, just to give direction in terms of the source of the funds. Laid out in the report is, I have now lost my screen here. Go back here for a second. Bring it up again. There's 2 options provided on the last page, either using the accumulated surplus reserve or the allocation of the COVID-19 restart grant. So I'll take a motion. I have Councillor Patterson first up on my screen here. So go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just could staff provide a reminder of what is in the accumulated surplus reserve, the amount in that, and then the amount that is in the COVID restart grant?
Sure, thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne, I know you've been waiting a long time to speak again at this meeting, so welcome back.
Thank you, Your Worship. $14 million in the accumulated surplus reserve, and 3.59 million in the COVID Restart 19 reserve.
And follow-up question, if I may, Mayor?
Go ahead.
So for the COVID-19 Restart grant, the funds are atypical to what would be a typical expense, whereas the accumulated surplus reserve would be a typical expense account that we would normally use. So for tracking the expenses against the Parks and Rec, is there a preference of staff of where we allocate those funds and how that might impact what we look at year over year for the cost of the Parks and Rec operation? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne.
Your Worship, from a staff perspective, there isn't much of a difference in terms of a preference. Just bear in mind that Council set aside the COVID-19 Restart grant fund specifically to offset expected revenue declines in the Parks, Rec, and Culture Department for 2021. Staff didn't expect that. We don't expect for the entirety of those funds to be used for that purpose in 2021. And therefore would likely ask the same question for the 2022 year for Parks, Rec, and Culture. So it will just remove funds available for that purpose in 2022. And that's really the only implication that staff would point out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much. Before putting forward a motion, I have a question through you to staff, probably Director Payne. Of the two possible sources of funds, which would have the least impact on a tax increase going forward?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne, is there any difference between those two?
Your Worship, no, it would make no difference.
Mr. Payne, just for clarification, would there be a tax increase resulting from this at this point, pulling from either of those sources?
No, Your Worship, it would just be a reduction in our reserve balance.
Well, depending on what my other councillors feel, I would be leaning towards the Restart grant, but let's see what others have to say about that.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Patterson, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, yes, thank you. And just to that, I guess my opinion is perhaps because we do in fact charge. I understand we do charge, so we get revenue from these courts. So I, with the COVID Restart grant being used to offset loss of revenue, I guess I might be more inclined to take it out of the surplus reserve monies because there will be income. And so in my mind, it just balances from an income account and an expense account.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Was that a motion or are you just expressing an opinion?
I'm happy to make that motion that the monies, I can't remember the amount now, I think it was 70,000 for the installation of the pickleball courts, to the relocation of them to the new lacrosse park, to the lacrosse park area at Carnarvon Beach Park, be taken from the district's accumulated surplus reserve fund.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Is there any other discussion on that? So it just want to make sure I'm clear. It sounded like you were speaking to taking it from the COVID-19 Restart grant, but the motion, your motion is to take it from the surplus reserve. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would take it from the surplus reserve.
Okay.
So that
Thank you.
so that we have income and expense in those categories.
Perfect. Nope, that's great. Thank you. I just want to make sure I misheard you. Then I apologize. So it's moved and seconded. Any other discussion on that? Not seeing any. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you very much. That takes care of that. We are up next, item 6.5. Back to Mr. Payne, grant and aid applications. This is really just to receive this report and to get a clarification on the process. and take any questions for Mr. Payne to take away. Mr. Payne, welcome back.
Thank you, Your Worship, and you summarized it well. The memo is just prepared for council and public information. Ideally, we start the grant and aid approval process a bit earlier in the year, so we are a bit behind compared to normal years, but nonetheless, that doesn't stop us from going forward. So the process recommended by staff this year, council will receive a worksheet with all of the grant and aid applications and the amount that they are requesting and previous amounts that they have been awarded. At the May 17th Committee of the Whole, applicants will be invited to present their application. And then at the May 25th, I believe the staff report wrote May 24th, I apologize for that, but the May 25th council meeting, council would, we would tabulate council allocation of those funds and come up with an average and then proceed with awarding of those grant and aid applications. So the total budget for the annual discretionary grant and aid amounts is just above $62,000 for 2021. There are approximately 18 applications that total $58,500. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Just for our clarification, what will come to us before that committee of the whole, however, would be the full applications with all the background information as well. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship. That's great.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council to Mr. Payne? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. Will we be getting any information about any of these groups and what their plans for the upcoming year at the May 25th meeting?
Mr. Payne, perhaps just go back and review that process again.
Yes, Your Worship. So council will receive a package which contains all of the applications, and those applications will outline intended uses of those funds. And that will be for tomorrow. And also you have a chance to speak with the applicants directly at the May 17th Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. And based on that information, we'll then go away and fill in our sheets, et cetera, and come back to the May 25th for discussion. Councillor Braithwaite, you had your hand?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And through you to staff, there are possibly a couple of those organizations that have asked for grants that I may be involved with their boards. So what is going to be the best process for how we arrange those to be presented, and for me to recuse myself from the ones that I may have to recuse myself from?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. And other councillors may be in a similar situation. So broadly speaking, I might go to Mr. Payne, but it may also be a good question for Ms. Williams to answer in terms of process. I see Ms. Williams has unmuted herself, so I'll go there first. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, if we know in advance of any potential applications that a member may feel that they are in conflict with, we can arrange them in such a way, group them in such a way to do that. But then if it's a body that you've been appointed to by this council, okay, then that would be something you would have to recuse yourself from. Yes, if it's a body that this council has appointed you to, then the conflict of interest exemptions regulation would apply. But otherwise, yes, you would want to recuse yourself. So if you want to notify myself by email, if anyone has any areas that they feel that may be in a conflict with, we will arrange it so that that's as efficient as possible for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And yeah, if there's any doubt, just call and talk to the staff and get some direction on that. Ultimately, it's up to each councillor's discretion as to how they feel on those items. Any other questions of staff? I just have one question, and that's just in terms of it doesn't affect the consideration here, Mr. Payne, but I note that we've divided these appropriately into the annual, discretionary, and perpetual categories, but there are some that are not absolutely perpetual. I'm thinking of the South Island Prosperity Partnership as a good example. They've come essentially with a 5-year ask, and will come back again in all likelihood at that time as they morph their services and operations and ask again. So items of even the CRD, that is, I think, a contract position for Bowker Creek and may change over time. So is it possible to perhaps in future group these maybe into perpetual or time limited, especially if council wishes to bring back, say, something, even if it's not limited by time, but council would say, maybe we'll approve this for the next 3 years, but then bring it back at that point for consideration. So we don't have to look at it every year, but it might have some time limitation. Is that something that we might look at doing in future?
Yes, Your Worship, and I would actually say that the term perpetual is probably not the best term for this. It's really annual, ongoing grants, if you want to call it that. Many of these, what we're calling perpetual grants, are actually subject to a contract, and those contract terms, end at different times. And when they're up for renewal, that's when they get considered again. And SIP is another good example where council, they might have asked for a 5-year term, but it's a membership that we can commit to on a 2-year basis. So yes, that's not going to be in there without further council consideration in future years.
Okay, thank you for that. Because I know that is now, it's in the budget, but and not necessarily that visible to the public or to councillors as well. So that's great. I appreciate that feedback. Any other questions of staff at this point? Otherwise, we'll just have a motion to receive this report. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Green.
I'll make that motion, Mayor.
Second.
Thank you. Is any other discussion on this item? Not seeing any. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. And the last item here, or sorry, not last item of the section. Back to you, Mr. Payne, for the Sustainable Procurement Policy Amendment. Again, fairly minor changes here, but somewhat important. So perhaps you can just give a quick overview of this item 6.6.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Council will recall that the Sustainable Procurement Policy was adopted in late 2019. It was further amended as staff recommended some adjustments in June. That amendment was mainly centered around reporting and monitoring requirements for staff to the public and council. Staff are again bringing forward some recommended amendments. Some may be termed as housekeeping, but not all of the amendments on before council today. I wouldn't call them all housekeeping. The housekeeping items include exempting certain types of purchases from the purchasing policy. And these are type of purchases that are typically exempted from a purchasing policy. So that's why I am calling it housekeeping items, such as legal services, payment of damages or settlements, placement of investment funds, or the hiring of staff. Might seem intuitive, which is why they were originally excluded, but for greater clarity, staff are recommending those housekeeping amendments. In terms of purchase orders, this would be a change in the internal control intensity required by the procurement policy. Currently, the procurement policy requires that purchase orders be issued for all purchases, no matter what their nature or size of purchase. So often a staff member will enter a purchase order for a $12 order of Staples or something to that nature. So staff are recommending that internal control level be raised to $2,000. So any purchase made under $2,000 can be done without a purchase order. Other internal controls would remain to ensure that purchase is still authorized, but a purchase order wouldn't be necessary. What we're finding is that the number of purchases under $2,000 are significant, but the dollar value of those amounts are not. So the dollar value of purchases above $2,000 are the vast majority of our expenses. So this policy would still apply on a dollar value to most of our expenditures. The $2,000 limit is also recommended because it is consistent with our tangible capital asset capitalization threshold. That's the threshold which we look at purchases to see whether or not those should be classified as capital expenditures or operating expenditures. So thank you, Your Worship. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Are there questions to Mr. Payne on this? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you for that information, Mr. Payne. Just for clarification, so that we stated at the meeting, of course, receipts are still required for all of the purchases that are recommended, even though they are perhaps just for a box of staples. There's still receipts required that must be produced in order to gain payment. Correct?
Mr. Payne?
Yes, Your Worship. Documentation for all our purchases, it would either be an invoice or a receipt that's attached to a credit card statement, or sorry, the term is escaping me, but basically a memo authorizing an expenditure. So it would be one of those three things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair. A question through you to staff. This is all part of our new process in general, and we're delegating more and more responsibility to staff in the appropriate ways, which is all good. And I certainly support the $2,000 aspect of the purchasers aspect. But with respect to reporting back to council, I don't recall receiving very many reports back to council providing on aspects of clarity or not clarity, oversight. Let's use the word oversight. I was wondering if staff could talk about how council will be able to maintain oversight as we delegate more of these purchases to staff, other than, of course, the 5-year financial plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne, what are the oversight models employed here?
Yes, Your Worship. An excellent question. The purchasing policy, as the procurement policy as amended in June of last year, requires periodic reporting of purchases that exceed $25,000, and any contracts that we've entered into that of whose value exceeds $25,000. Now that procurement policy amendment wasn't adopted until late June, so it wasn't in place for a Q2 budget reporting, but it was in place for our Q3 budget reporting. So council did receive an appendix with all the purchases that exceed $25,000 and contracts that we executed that exceeded $25,000. In addition to that, council receives an annual statement, the statement of financial information. It's a little bit different, but we are required to report all suppliers that we paid, where the total amount we paid that supplier in any given year exceeded $25,000. So those reports together meet the requirements of the procurement policy.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Councillor Zelka?
Follow-up. Thank you so much. I'm very, very pleased to hear that there's an intention for quarterly reports. And I presume the next quarterly report will be the first opportunity that council will see. For example, just use it as an example, I think we're putting that there's an RFP process probably happening right now with respect to the infill process that's going forward. So I presume at the next quarterly report, that's when we'll find out which particular supplier has won that RFP. Is that staff's understanding?
Mr. Payne, is that, I mean, some things come back to council earlier than the financial reporting, but go ahead, Mr. Payne.
Yeah, Your Worship, that's correct. Council is often advised that when we award a tender or an RFP, just simply because it's a requirement, depending on the size of the contract. But it certainly will show up in the quarterly reports. And just for clarity, the quarterly reports aren't every quarter. They are Q2, they are Q3. Q4, essentially, we skip because the financial statements are our cumulative report. In Q1, we don't bother because we haven't really adopted our budget by the end of Q1. So the real key reports you want to look out for transparency purposes are Q2, Q3, and then your annual financial statements.
Which make excellent summer reading. Thank you very much.
Yes, because we all need good sleeps in the summer. All right, good. Any other discussion on this item? Any members of the public who wish to address council on this, you're more than welcome to raise your hand at this time. And I'll just give a moment for people if they wish to, if they haven't called in already, you may call in and address council. Numbers are on the screen. Hit *9 to raise your hand. At this point, though, I think a motion is in order and we can have discussion On that motion, go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would first move receipt of the report titled Sustainable Procurement Policy Amendment 2021.
I see lots of seconders there. Any discussion on the movement to receive? Don't see any hands up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. I do see a hand up, it looks like, from one of our callers with the last 3 digits, 102. If that person wishes to address council, you may do so by hitting *9, or sorry, *6 to unmute. State your name and your municipality of residence. Oh, sorry, that's not a person who wishes to speak. That's my little cursor that turned into a hand as it was sitting over top of that person. My apologies. However, I don't see any hands raised. If anybody wishes to, this is the last chance to hit *9 to raise your hand. Don't see it there. Okay, so with that, I will come back to this table. Is there a secondary motion? Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I will make the motion that the amended sustainable procurement policy be adopted as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any other discussion on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Ms. Bay, you were up next for the contract award recommendation for animal control services. Welcome to our meeting. And for those watching, Ms. Bay is our Director of Strategic Initiatives and takes on some of our special projects. And again, I will provide an opportunity for members of the public to address council, but I would ask that if you wish to address and you're not in the meeting already, to call in at this time so that we can have you in the queue when we get to that point. Ms. Bay, welcome.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. The purpose of the report that's before you is to obtain approval to award an animal control services contract. We issued an RFP for these services back in February in order to support a competitive procurement process following expiry of the existing contract with Victoria Animal Control Services, which has been in place since 2015. Proposals for a new 3-year contract with potential for a 2-year extension were due by April 15th, 2021. With all the talk of our sustainable procurement policy that was on the previous agenda item, that policy requires that contracts exceeding $250,000 be approved by council. And that's why this item is before you tonight, as the cost of the recommended 3-year contract is estimated at $252,000 So, and that's excluding GST. So that's why it's before you for approval tonight. We received 2 proposals by the deadline. Both proposals indicated that they would provide the services called for in the RFP. One of the proposals, however, did not provide the detailed information on hourly rates that we requested in the RFP. And that information was really key to us being able to budget for service adjustments. So given that the information supplied was not consistent with what we had stipulated in the RFP, the submission was deemed non-compliant, leaving us with just one compliant proposal. So staff's recommendation is to award the contract to Victoria Animal Control Services as noted in the report. I will note that a significant change from this contract to the previous contract is that this contract provides council with the ability to adjust service levels up or down by up to 15% with appropriate notice as stipulated in the contract, should the council deem that desirable. And the reason for that really is to try and achieve the same level of service adjustment ability for council as council has if it had been staff providing those services. So previous contracts have not provided council with the ability within the contract term to adjust service levels up and down without issuing a new contract. So this new approach gives council a bit more flexibility. The district's 5-year financial plan provides funding for animal control services, and the cost to the district can vary somewhat year to year, depending on call out volumes. So the amount cited in the report is based on a continuation of past patterns. It could end up being slightly more if there's more call out services, or slightly less if there are fewer call outs for service. Significantly, the amount provided in the financial plan is anticipated to be sufficient to cover the contract costs. Your worship, that concludes my comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bay. Are there questions to staff? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Bay, for this report. A couple of questions I have. Very disappointed that we really, in essence, have only one bidder on the contract. So that's disappointing, although you have explained that. And I guess as part of that process, you are not probably at liberty to disclose to public what the other contract would have been, and it would have been hard to really do a comparison. But I'm just wondering if you could comment on the rate within the contract, how that has increased from the rate that was in the last contract, and if over the term of the last contract there has been any noticeable change in services for additional call-out calls for or overtime hours to deal with an increase in any of the complaints or situations that they have to deal with, or frequency and numbers of tickets or specialized service, I don't know, whatever it is. But so if you could comment on that, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. So a question on what rate increases we've seen over the last few years and the change in services, overtime, et cetera. Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. So with respect to the increase in costs, I can say that it's within the typical type of cost of living increases. We didn't see a huge increase. I'm reluctant to disclose kind of too much about it because it is competitive information in terms of the individual hourly rates, but I can certainly confirm that it's within certainly the cost of living types of adjustments that we would expect to see. So it was not highly out of the ordinary. With respect to the calls for service, those go very much up and down from year to year, but broadly speaking, we're not seeing any dramatic changes. We do have the ability to adjust the services based on complaints. For example, if we're seeing particular issues with the need for increased enforcement, say at Willows Beach at the times that the seasons change and the dog use policies on the beach change, that's something that we have the ability to direct services to. We do get monthly reports from BACS that allow us to monitor very closely what the patterns are, and we have a look at those on an annual basis as well to make sure that that we are providing the services in accordance with what with where the demand is. I'll also note that we do ask questions every year in our budget questionnaire about bylaw control, and we do get comments through that with respect to enforcement, and specifically we tend to get a lot of comments about dog control and the lack of it and the too much of it. We get both ends of the spectrum, but that's another way that we monitor what the public level of satisfaction is with our bylaw services, and I share those comments with the service providers so that we can continue to be responsive.
Thank you. That answers my questions, and I think it is great that we've already established a rate that allows us some flex room in the number of hours should an adjustment be required. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Braithwaite and Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. And like Councillor Patterson, I was really disappointed that we didn't have two proper proposals come forward. And I guess that's one of my questions is, from a fairness perspective, I understand that if a proposal is non-compliant, then we have to discount it. But as there were only 2 proposals in this particular case, and based on the amount of money that these proposals are worth, would it not be better for us to take a step back and ask the proposal that was non-compliant to adjust and add in the financial information that was missing? Or is that just, from a fairness perspective, is that just not something that could be considered?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Ms. Bay?
It is, as you laid out, that from a fairness perspective, it would not be considered appropriate. We have the ability to ask for clarifying information on information that is supplied, but we do not have the ability to ask for new information.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I have Councillor Zelka, then Green.
Thank you, Chair. Just I guess continuing this similar theme, do we have the ability to not accept any RFP and restart the RFP process from scratch, which would effectively allow all proponents to resubmit new bids?
Ms. Bay?
Through your worship, council always has the option to decide not to proceed. Having said that, it does throw into question how fair that would be, given that we have now disclosed the value of what the one bid has been. And so that's there for public information. And I think it could be legitimately questioned how fair that process would be.
Okay, I just wanted to thank you. I just wanted to know in the RFP process what options and what levers we're allowed to pull with respect to fairness and with respect to the legal capabilities that we have at hand. A very simple question for you. I went through this and maybe I'm not reading it very clearly, and I'm sure I'm the one at fault here. Is this the dollar figure mentioned in the report, is that total over across 3 years, or is that per year?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. The amount mentioned in the report is over the course of 3 years.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Green?
Thank you, Mayor. And through you to Ms. Bay. Ms. Bay, thank you very much for the report and for the contract information. And this is just a general question, and it is not meant to put you on the spot because it's moot probably anyway, but can you make any comments on the performance of this contractor over the course of the contract? Well, certainly you haven't been here for the whole contract, but during your experience, any comments, positive or negative, as to the performance of the contractor? Thank you.
Councillor Green, would it be okay if I asked her to answer the question in this way? Is there any areas of concern of performance that would indicate they were not able to deliver the services asked in this RFP process? Is probably a safer way of asking that question.
Okay, yes, thank you. Thanks for your help.
Yeah, Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. In response to your phrased question, no, I do not have any concerns about their ability to deliver on the contract as per what we have indicated in the request for proposals.
Thank you very much.
I think the logical follow-up to that, though, is what oversights are there to ensure performance meeting the expectations of that contract?
Thank you, Your Worship. So we do require monthly reports from the contractor, and we do. I do monitor that in terms of looking at particular indicators in terms of the calls per service, the cost per call, those types of indicators. We do also, as I mentioned earlier, ask the question each year of our public that has the opportunity to respond to the budget questionnaire, what they think of the service level. So that's another opportunity for us to look at it. So And of course, there's my own reaching out and asking for service and the level of service that I get in response to that. So on those matters, I've to date certainly been very satisfied with the responsiveness that we've gotten from VAX.
Thank you, Ms. Bay. Councillor Appleton, and then Councillor Patterson for a second time.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I guess what I'm curious about, through you to staff, what I'm curious about is I suppose finding out that you didn't get the contract is feedback in a fairly real sense, but I'm just kind of wondering, within the boundaries of fairness and the operation of the RFP as it has to be done, what our ability is to provide feedback to the unsuccessful applicant in this case. And the reason I bring that up is because I can only imagine that there would be a fairly limited number of organizations that would be in a position to provide this service. I can't imagine that there are a dozen potential organizations on the South Island that would be able to provide that service, and our colleagues in other municipal governments would be calling on the same services. So I'm wondering whether there's an opportunity for this potential service provider, who might also be looking to provide services to our neighbors and to our other municipal colleagues, to be able to essentially improve. It seems a shame that non-compliance with the RFP would unfortunately exclude them, is the way it has to be. But I'm just wondering whether or not there's a way for us to provide, I guess, what you would call informal feedback, or something beyond just, well, you didn't meet the compliance levels of the RFP. They may be in a position to respond 3 years from now, or they may be in a position to respond to some of our neighbors. So just asking that question.
Hey, Councillor Appleton. I think, Ms. Bay, you can probably address the specifics of the non-compliance in terms of the area that we were asking for to help us. You touched on it a bit in terms of understanding, so we could make service level changes. So there were some requirements there. Can you speak, I think in this public forum is the appropriate place, to what information we needed that was not included in the one application?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have already been in touch with the proponent to advise them of what our concern was, and to let them know that this report was going forward tonight. And I was able to provide specific feedback that our concern related to the lump sum fee proposal, rather than the detailed breakdown of hourly costs that we had requested.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bay. Is that satisfactory, Councillor Appleton?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. It's just interesting to contemplate the number of different organizations that could provide the service. And I think that regionally, as a group of municipalities, we kind of want to communicate to potential service providers how to be successful and how to present, good quality bids, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a follow-up question. This contractor's website shows that for wild animals that are deceased or whatever, that the contact shown for dealing with that is Oak Bay Public Works. And, my understanding is that that would only be the case if it was on public property, and that if it occurs on private property, that it is a resident charge for removal. Do you have any insight as to what that process is?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't know a definitive answer to that. I'd be happy to look into it and get back to you.
Thank you. That would be fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands up on this. Is there any members of the public who wish to speak? Again, this is a chance right now to hit *9 to raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll come back to this table. Not seeing any hands popping up there. We would need well, first to get a motion to receive.
I'll move receipt of the report, the staff report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the receipt motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Again, go ahead.
I'll move that a 3-year contract for animal control services be awarded to Victoria Animal Control Services at an estimated amount of $252,070, excluding GST.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on this? I'm just going to go to Ms. Williams to ensure we haven't had anybody trying to raise their hand that I haven't been able to see.
No, your worship, nobody at this time.
Okay, so back to this table and the motion is live on the floor. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. Thank you. Item number, sorry, make sure I've got my notes correct. Under item number 7, we are now leaving the portion for public input and going to the portion which is just more procedural in nature. Item 7, most of these, the first ones are motions that have had first, second, and third reading. Again, generally procedurally, we don't debate adoption motions, but any member of council is welcome to raise anything that they see fit for any of these. So if I can just procedurally go through, maybe the same mover and seconder can read move and second for adoption of these.
Move that the financial plan
Go ahead.
bylaw 2021-2025 number 4792 be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Anybody wish to discuss? Not seeing any discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Same process for number 7.2.
I move that the tax rates bylaw 2021 number 4793 be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you very much. 7.3, please.
I move that the Boulevard Frontage Tax Bylaw number 3416, 1982 Amendment Bylaw 2021 number 4794 be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. And item number 7.4.
I move that the Alternative Tax Scheme Bylaw 2020 number 4795 be adopted.
Seconded.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Anybody who's wondering why we're laughing, it's just because there was a discussion about removing the word scheme last time at the meeting. So all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That passes. Thank you very much, everyone. We're back to public input. Welcome at item 8.1. We have Parks, Recreation, and Culture fees and charges. This would be for first, second, and third reading. Procedurally, for anybody attending and wishing to speak, we will take a motion to move first and second reading. Before we call the question, we will have discussion and debate and invite input from the public. And then we'll call the question, then we'll move to third reading where we typically don't have debate. So if anybody from the public wishes to address this item, please call in now, or if you're in the meeting, please raise your hand as we typically on these don't spend a lot of time in debate, but you never know what will happen. So if I could get first motion to move first and second reading.
Can we move receipt first, Mayor, or?
Oh, sorry. Yes, we can move the report first. That's
I'll
fine.
move receipt of the report.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. And then again, first and second reading.
I'll move first that the Parks, Recreation, and Culture fees and charges bylaw number 4777 2021 be given first and second readings.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Moved and seconded. So this is a chance for council to ask questions of staff. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. I presume that this is relating to section 194 of the Community Charter, municipal fees. I just wanted to confirm, is that the section that this is sort of making reference to in terms of the provision of the Community Charter that we're providing these fees under?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne.
Your worship, that's correct. That's the section of the Community Charter that provides the authority to levy fees by bylaw.
Excellent. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I just another question through, I guess, to our person who handles a question about prior procedure. I understand the Ministerial Order 190, whatever the pandemic ministerial order that allows us to have this sort of meeting without the public attending in person, also allows us to adopt a bylaw after first, second, and third reading on the same day. I just wanted to ask from a procedures perspective, is that something that we're able to do if we choose to?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. The answer is yes, but I think choose not to for the most part unless it's necessary. Mr. Payne, I'll go to you just for confirmation.
Your worship, that is correct. The council may choose to adopt a bylaw in respect of fees and charges in one meeting under the ministerial order. But I believe that when possible, the district has opted to adopt bylaws in using 2 council meetings.
I very much appreciate staff's comments on that. And if staff needs us to approve this sooner instead of later, I'm certainly open to that. But I'll leave that for my council colleagues to weigh in on. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The Parks, Rec and Culture, of course, is a broad range of services that we supply, and this, of course, is for the fees that are recommended by staff, and the bylaw provides for that. If council wants to have council input and oversight and have more discussion on this, what would be the point in time when we would request of staff that they come forward with perhaps some recommendations for options for that?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne?
Your worship, staff don't have a specific date in mind, but a general time frame would be appropriate that we're aiming for, and it would be prior to a budget commencing, and as well as prior to when such amendments to the fees would become effective. So essentially around fall time would be the appropriate time for that. And that is in the staff work plan to bring forward the opportunity for council and the public to discuss in a policy format how the Parks, Rec and Culture fees and charges are arrived at in the bylaw.
Thank you. And so just to follow up for clarification, then the appropriate methodology here would be to bring this forward for council strategic priorities so that it would get into the next budget framework cycle. Is that correct?
Mr. Payne, I heard something slightly different from you, that this
Yeah.
will be coming back in the fall before we get to that procedure.
Yeah, your worship, I would say that a policy document for how the fees and charges are arrived at, it will be part of the regular work plan, and that is something that will come to council before the next budget cycle. However, if council were wanting to embark on a larger rate review or something of that nature, that would be an appropriate request to make of council at the strategic priority session.
I'm just going to hold this for a second and just get a motion to extend the meeting by 10 minutes. It's 10 o'clock.
I'll make that motion.
Moved and seconded.
Second, yeah.
All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you very much for that, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Patterson, you still have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. No, I think that that the instructions that the staff provided are good, and I have an understanding then of anything that I might want to see and how to address it as we go forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very briefly. So then, without assuming that no other significant changes are needed to the bylaw, then a typical year-over-year change would just have an amending bylaw revising the schedule. That's why it's structured this way with the schedule, and we would just be an amendment bylaw would just essentially comprise a change to the schedule. Do I have that right?
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Payne.
Yeah, that is correct. Unless council wish to really change the philosophy by which Parks, Rec and Culture Department go about arriving at the fees, it would just be an amendment that represents market conditions, demand conditions, just amending the schedule yearly.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. We have first and second reading. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak? Again, this is the time now to hit *9 to raise your hand if you've called in. And Ms. Williams, is there any member of the public that I can't see on my screen that might have called in at this point or be part of our meeting?
No, your worship, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So back to this table, we have a motion for first and second reading live on the table. Is there any other discussion on this? Not seeing any. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Yes, well, one last question. I understand we have at least one room that's available for community use. I'm not referring to the room at the library, which is available for free, but I understand there is at least one room at the Parks Rec and Culture building on B Street, which has a free usage. The reason why I mentioned that is that this talks about various meeting rooms with charges. Am I correct? I don't know whether we have someone from Parks, Rec and Culture available to answer that, but if not, I'd be fine to get the answer at a later time.
I don't see Mr. Meikle still here, but if you're here, Mr. Meikle, do you have an answer for that question? I don't see him here. Why don't we take that answer offline, Councillor?
I'll take that offline. All right, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the?
Sorry, Your Worship, can you hear me?
Oh, I can. Yes, go ahead. Is that Mr. Meikle?
It's Ray Herman. I'm here.
Mr. Herman. Okay.
We used to make the arena boardroom. There's a small boardroom overlooking the arena available for what we called regular users or community groups free of charge. It received very little use. I think in the time that I've been here, maybe 2 or 3 times. And since that time, we've had other demands from a staff perspective to meet some health issues, providing alternative spaces for people to work rather than, for instance, being out in the pool environment, things like that. So right now that room is set up with workstations for staff for, in a flexible sort of way. So we haven't offered it lately, and as I said, it hadn't been taken advantage of. I suppose if there was movement afoot to make use of it by community groups, we could make alternative arrangements again for the staffing, but there just was no demand, so we decided to make other use of the space.
Thank you, Mr. Herman, and thank you for sticking around.
Yes, and thank you for the information. And maybe a post-pandemic, we can possibly revisit this, but I'll wait till then. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't see any other hands up on this. So unless I do, I will call the question. So we have a motion first and second reading. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion for third reading, please, Councillor Braithwaite.
I'll move that the Parks, Recreation and Culture Fees and Charges Bylaw number 4777, 2021 be given third reading.
Moved. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Moved and seconded. Don't typically debate on third reading, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. I believe that brings us to adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Have a great night, everybody. Almost made it under the 3-hour window there, but very close this time. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, everyone.